Hi, Mayor Martin, it's Selena here. We're not going to use the co-host feature at this time, so you can ignore that comment.
All right, thank you. Okay, I will call to order then the meeting for April 27th, 2020 at 7 p.m. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. I am going to take a roll call of each member, and so please unmute yourself and just let me know that you are here. Councillor Baxter.
Here.
Councillor Day.
Here.
Councillor Jensen.
Present.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Here.
Councillor Parkinson.
Present.
Councillor Logan.
Here.
Thank you. Moving on to two in-camera resolutions. The regular meeting of council in camera was held this evening at 6 p.m. And I do have a release of a resolution. The release is that the terms of reference for the Waterfront Coastal Process Committee be amended to include a representative from Parks Canada under Section 5 membership and quorum, and that Michelle Holmes be appointed to serve on the Waterfront Coastal Process Committee as the Parks Canada representative, and further that Dr. Chris Lang be replaced Maria Bremer as the Royal Roads University representative.
Yeah, you're not in either.
Moving on to approval of the agenda. 3.1, this is the new for council. So we have three agendas. The first two, sorry, Selena, I can hear you.
Oh, my apologies, Mayor Martin. We have three members of staff in the waiting room just waiting to be admitted. So you've got your Director of Engineering, your Director of Finance, and your Deputy Treasurer. If you wouldn't mind just admitting them under participants.
And he's on other staff, Terry, Richard.
And any other staff that may be in there.
Yeah, we got Terry,
Okay.
Richard.
I have a Kathy Hartshorn. Should I admit that person?
Pardon me?
I have a Kathy Hartshorn. Should I admit that person?
That's Jim Hart.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have a Trevor.
Trevor Auger.
Yes, please. Can you mute Brent?
I'm just looking to see if there's anyone else I need to admit. I just have two phone numbers, and that's it. So I don't, is there anyone else I need to admit, Selena?
No, if you just have two phone numbers, then everybody who needs to be in is in.
Okay, thank you. Moving back to approval of the agenda. So we do have three agendas. We have a near-term agenda, a long-term agenda, and then the regular council meeting agenda for April 27th. The first two are for reference so that you can reference it at every meeting. And then I am looking for a mover and seconder regarding the regular council meeting agenda for April 27th.
Move.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Any discussion?
I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies, Councillor Day. The problem I'm having right now is under participants, I cannot get rid of that box, so I cannot see you or Councillor Parkinson right now. So I apologize.
So if you touch the participants again, it'll go away.
Yeah, it's not doing that for me.
Try swearing at it.
I'm gonna go upside down and see if that maybe it's my biped. No, it's still. I'm sorry. I can't seem to be able to make the participants disappear. I'll work on that in a moment. But I will come back to you, Councillor Day. You got a comment?
Yes, just in regards to the near-term agenda, I'd like to propose an amendment, which I did run past the Chief Administrative Officer earlier today as well, and he said this would be the appropriate thing to do. We have had a very long agenda at our last meeting, and so I'm looking for ways to make our meetings more fruitful and productive so that it's not too overwhelming. And because of the statutory holiday it appears that we are not hosting a committee of the whole on May the 18th. So I would just like to propose that we find another date in which to hold a committee of the whole meeting so that that reduces the May 25th meeting, which is very long. There are 9 agenda items on that night, and some of them may be somewhat lengthy in discussion. So I think a committee of the whole that could handle maybe 3 or 4 items would be beneficial.
And so, sorry, Councillor Day, did you have an idea of a date that you were thinking that might work? Did you look at the calendar?
I didn't look at the calendar, but I'm assuming that it's the Monday is the holiday, so I was going to suggest a Tuesday meeting.
I believe, so I'm going to believe that that's, staff can correct me, I believe that that's May 19th.
Mayor Martin, it's Selena here.
Yeah.
May the 19th would be the logical date to hold that committee of the whole. I just wanted to make a mention that the items on the May the 25th meeting could not go to a committee of the whole. Those are bylaws for readings and recommendations coming from a previous committee of the whole. But certainly staff could balance out the business on other committee of the wholes if that's a possibility.
Okay.
If I could speak to the issue for me is not so much whether it's committee of the whole or council, but how many items are on one agenda. So even an additional council meeting date to split that up into more manageable chunks would be welcome.
So I guess I hear you, Councillor Day, and I'm certainly happy to work with staff to find that date. But did you want to actually make a motion to that effect, or are you happy just to leave it with me?
I'm happy to leave it with you if we're going to find another date so that we don't. I don't think we're as productive as we could be when we're dealing with so many items on a single agenda.
Okay. Thank you. What I will do is I'll follow up with staff, and then we'll also follow up with you as well as the rest of council.
Perfect.
On that. So we are still on the. I do have a mover and seconder for the regular council meeting for April 27th. I'm going to call the vote. Any in opposition? And again, I apologize. I cannot see Councillor Day or Councillor Parkinson right now. So unfortunately, if you're waving, that doesn't help because I can't see you. I wish I could. I apologize, Council. I don't know why my thing will not unrelease.
Can we not just use virtual hand raising like we do for committee of the whole?
Well, unfortunately, it looks like my whole iPad is sort of frozen up here. That's the problem, is I can see everybody, but it doesn't seem to be acting otherwise. We'll keep going. And I'm sorry, so I called the vote, that passed. We are now moving on to public participation. 5 individuals have registered to speak. I only see 2 in the room right now, so I'm going to omit the first person, and then we'll go from there. And I'm just giving it a moment because there's about a 10-second delay before the person actually is able to log in. So we are in public participation. I just admitted somebody, but I'm sorry, I don't know who it was. Is anyone there? If you have joined for public participation, I have just let you in. I'm going to unmute. There seems to be a phone number with a mute, so I'm going to unmute this audio for this person. So I am looking at phone number 250-294. No, excuse me, 250-294-26. I'm not going to say the last 2 digits.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, thank you, Mayor Martin. It's John English calling. Thank you very much.
I will let you go first. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Martin and council members. We would like to offer our input and comments on the agenda for this evening's meeting. I guess we need to start with saying that we continue to be disappointed that our mayor and council would be continuing to work to push through controversial changes on city policies, guidelines, and bylaws that govern long-term development. The COVID-19 crisis has significantly curtailed the public's ability to provide input on these very important, far-reaching changes. The COVID-19 crisis has also raised many more urgent and pressing matters that need council attention, in our view. This is not the time for business as usual for anyone, including for the City of Colwood. While we commend the actions the city has taken thus far to reduce the planned 3% tax increase for this year to zero, that's a good first step, but more needs to be done. The provincial government, the federal government, business leaders, labor leaders, and other municipal governments are advising that people have lost their jobs and their incomes. Many more people are experiencing significant reductions in their incomes, even if they have been lucky enough to keep their jobs. The government's business and labor and media, governments, businesses, labor and media are all telling us that it is going to be some time, at least 1.5 to 2 years, before most people are going to be able to recover financially from this fallout of COVID-19. A zero increase in 2020 property tax, followed by a 3% increase in 2021, and another 4% increase in 2022, it's not good enough. People in our community aren't going to be seeing 7% increases in their incomes between now and then. Delaying the date when penalties are levied by only 30 days for late payment and taxes is also not good enough. We should not be pushing these changes through on first, second, and third readings tonight. Many people in our city are experiencing real hardship. They need real financial help, and they need it now. The mayor, the council, and staff should conduct further, more in-depth reviews of the financial plans for 2020, 2021, and 2022 with the objective of delivering significant reductions in city costs to enable the city to reduce the current property tax burden on its citizens and to also free up funds to support other initiatives that might help the citizens of the city with the difficult times that they are facing right now. So some suggestions are the city could allocate unutilized space to set up a food bank. Right now, there is no food bank in the city of Colwood, and I know my neighbors and I would all support this and contribute to it. The city could also work with local churches to set up affordable daycares and after-school activity centers to help parents who are trying to get back to work, sometimes at 2 jobs. And we notice that the Wanda Fuca Rec Center is just sitting there empty right now. And the city also has that hall that it rents out on occasion. So these are just ideas and options, but the message is that we need to dig deeper, we need to investigate more, we need to generate real savings in money, real savings in real reductions in property taxes. And we need to free up some money to help other initiatives like this. I'm sure that you and other people could also come up with additional good initiatives that would help people today when they most need it. The mayor, city, and council and non-union staff could also consider taking voluntary pay cuts. This not only would show empathy and concern for citizens who are suffering financially, it would also position the city to be able to approach its partners, such as service providers and suppliers, and also its union staff to take similar reductions in order to relieve the cost burden on the City of Colwood taxpayers during this difficult time. So those are our comments with respect to items that are being considered tonight, 7.4, 8.2, and 8.3. We also have comments on item 7.1, and we're opposed to the city staff proposal on the agenda tonight to further reduce parking standards in Royal Bay South and Royal Beach. Many people in our community have come forward over many meetings over the last few months with mayor and council and with city staff to let the city know about all the parking problems that have been experienced in Royal Bay North. The staff recommendation to further reduce parking standards in Royal Bay South is incomprehensible to the people that live in our community. We are opposed to any reduction in parking standards at this time. We also strongly disagree with the statement in the report that no communication is required in this matter. We think it certainly does, and it certainly impacts the OCP, which is, I think, something that does require a lot further additional community consultation and input. If the city is to consider reduced parking standards, it should do so for new developments across the entire city and not just inflict this misery on the people living in and around Royal Bay. At the same time, the city should institute bylaws prohibiting people from parking in front of other people's properties to enable those people to maintain access to their properties. That's been a problem in Royal Bay North. Further, a bylaw is also needed to prohibit people parking vehicles and trailers on lawns because that affects not just the people that live on the property where the trailers and cars are parked, but also affects the property values around. So those are our comments for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I am now looking at phone number 250-213-30. And again, I'm not saying the last two digits. That's your phone number. You are next for public participation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council staff. This is Ian Ward, resident in Royal Bay at 46370 Latoria Boulevard. I'd like to, thank Mayor and Council for the opportunity to speak this evening. I recognize it's a challenging forum for everyone, and certainly appreciate the effort of all, including city staff, to make it workable. For the record, though, while I do appreciate, the higher levels of government have sanctioned this, continued regular council business, I find it concerning. I would dare say even borderline duplicitous that, council would consider to undertake to adopt significant changes to bylaws, and or the official community plan, and during a time when tangible public input is really so limited in scope. The forum doesn't allow for real effective community participation. In my mind, the focus should be on COVID-19 and community stability, not potentially divisive actions that contravene the best interests of many residents and taxpayers, or potentially contravene the best interests of many residents and taxpayers. So suffice to say, I'm a little disappointed. And this is a sentiment shared by many of my neighbors, fellow residents and members of Colwood and the Royal Bay and the Royal Bay Neighborhood Association. That being said, I'd like to somewhat more succinctly address two pressing concerns. Number one for me is the agenda item 7.1, the parking issue in Royal Bay. The adoption of the proposed amendments to the OCP, which, as you know, is a fairly recent community-driven plan updated in 2018. To me, and I say this somewhat facetiously, will create a two-tier municipality. Effectively, those who sort of moved into Colwood ahead of new developments, and those like myself, who are essentially being told by this, your quality of life matters just a little bit less. Density is the priority. So, where you park your car is where you find a spot. So, as you've been told time and again by residents in this community, there's already a parking problem in Latoria North. It's something that's been community council numerous times through numerous methods. Now the developers potentially seek to exacerbate it, really just in pursuit of profit. There's little benefit to the community that I can see. I would suggest to council that now is not the time to ram through these changes that have this potentially significant negative impact on this evolving community. Now is the time to recognize that leadership in crisis sometimes also means restraint and further review. So, I humbly ask you to refrain from moving forward on this staff recommendation until such time as you can properly evaluate, engage with the community, and really truly assess the impact. And I really couldn't even comment on it, but the statement that no communication was necessary. Well, no communication is just tantamount to failure. In what world is no communication an effective means to significantly impact people's lives, their investments, their homes, their families' well-being? It just doesn't make sense to me. Secondly, trying to be succinct, I had a question for council that unfortunately couldn't find, based on the committee of the whole meeting. Is the empty lot currently identified as 360 Latoria, is that identified as a component of the commons and included in the current proposed amendment to the OCP? And the reason I bring that up is that if it is, included in these proposed amendments, I would suggest to council that this would effectively just provide a council-sanctioned end around of council's own directive for property owner district development to, go back to the proverbial drawing board and consult with the community, something that they, quite frankly, have been unwilling to do. Many of us in the community have reached out to them numerous times to no avail, and it appears to me that they're sort of biding time to perhaps do this end around. So I would suggest that, that is worth some review, and certainly many of us would like to see some clarification. And on that note, like I said, try to be succinct. So thank you very much to all of you, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Ben. I am going to go to the next person in public participation is a phone number 250-478-11. That individual, if you're online. Again, I'll try it one more time. The 250-478-11, and again, I'm not saying the last two digits. Is that individual online? I have unmuted you.
I think that's me.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Trevor Apperly. I'm at 3535 Promenade Crescent. Good evening to you all. Once again, let me thank each of you for your service to our community during this difficult time. With your permission, I wish to address several matters pertinent to the issues being addressed at tonight's regular council meeting. With all due respect to Councillor Baxter's comments at the April 20th meeting of the Committee of the Whole, this simply is not a reasonable or equitable method of public participation in dealing with issues of the magnitude associated with amending the City of Colwood's official community plan. In this period of global shutdown, this council should quite reasonably be deferring these matters until such time as the recommendations by city officials can be publicly debated and dealt with appropriately. Now is not that time. The business of the city must clearly continue. However, you must surely agree that there is a continuum of matters requiring your focus and attention, and that of city officials. It can easily be argued that in the face of this pandemic, the proposed amendments to the OCP and their associated rezoning would not be and should not be high on that continuum. Under normal circumstances, I would have a lot to say on these matters. However, given the time constraints associated with this electronic meeting venue, I will simply try and give you the Coles Notes version of my thoughts. Firstly, I fully support and endorse the presentation tabled and the comments given to you this evening by John English. John is the duly elected president of the Royal Bay Homeowners Association, a body whose membership now represents hundreds of households, residents, ratepayers, and voters in the Royal Bay community. He speaks for all of us residing in Royal Bay. His comments are based on wide canvassing of views in the neighborhood and endorsed by the community. His views are therefore our views and represent the concern and quite frankly outrage the community is rightly feeling over the recent actions taken by this council respecting the changes being proposed to amend the official community plan and rezone the Royal Bay lands of Latoria North, Royal Beach, and Latoria South at 360 Latoria Boulevard. This brings me once again to the off-street parking standards for Latoria South and Royal Beach, agenda item 7.1, being recommended by city officials. If you move this agenda item forward for bylaw drafting and approval, then by definition, simply through the resulting building footprint expansions, you're going to allow a tripling of the number of dwellings in Royal Beach, a doubling of the number of dwellings in Latoria North, and while it's not entirely clear whether or not it is included in the proposed amendments, a doubling of the number of units at 360 Latoria Boulevard on the corner of Latoria Boulevard and Ryder Heshnall Way. These multiples, in turn, mean that the value of the Seacliff Properties, Gablecraft Homes, and District Investment Groups, Inc. holdings in Royal Bay will increase significantly, and I might add, not in a linear fashion, but exponentially. In other words, in the case of Seacliff Properties and District Investments Group, Inc., with your simple approval of the recommendation at hand, they will enjoy a significant value increase in their investments without having had the need to put as much as a single shovel in the ground. As an aside, Lance LaFleur and his team at Gablecraft Homes have done an exceptional job as initially the builder on behalf of BCIMC and more recently in pursuing their investment opportunity upon the acquisition of the larger asset base on Royal Bay lands from BCIMC. The internal rates of return each of them would have had been using prior to the current economic downturn meant that their hurdle rates were already low. Should you accept this recommendation, you are, for all intent and purpose, taking away any lingering downside risk that projects may have had, and you are giving them every opportunity to simply sell on their investments in order to realize the gain in the net present value of their assets. Now, you might reasonably ask, why should they do that? In the case of Seacliff Properties, it would be because they are basically a special purpose corporation employed to manage real estate investments. Seacliff Properties is ultimately owned as of July 2019 by Bentall Greenough, one of North America's and the world's largest real estate investment managers, with head offices in New York, Toronto, London, and Tokyo, and real estate investment professionals in 22 offices worldwide, and with approximately $46 billion of assets under management, serving the interests of more than 750 institutional clients. Bentall Greenough is in turn 56% majority owned by Sun Life Financial. Why does any of this matter? It matters because, one, we are not giving these developers any need for a long-term commitment to our community. Two, they will do precisely what you and I would do in their shoes. As real estate investment managers, they will take the return as early as they can. Three, irrespective of the fact that Royal Bay was intended through the OCP to be a new master planned seaside community, the critical part is not just doing the planning, but executing in a thoughtful way. In this instance, by approving the recommendation, you will effectively take away any agreement, any alignment of objectives between the developers and the long-term plans of the community of Colwood writ large. Flipping land made more valuable simply by the largesse of this council is not thoughtful execution. Lastly, as I understand it, the planning horizon of this OCP is approximately 20 years, and its policies are designed to shape growth to a population of 27,000, which is expected by 2038. While the OCP does not obligate a council to undertake specific actions or projects, all bylaws enacted and public works undertaken must be consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies outlined in an adopted OCP. The OCP provides the base from which future land use decisions are made regarding new development. The OCP planning process launched in the autumn of 26 place, took over 3 phases as I understand it, bringing together approximately 1.5 years of background research, analysis of existing conditions, planning and design, broad community engagement with stakeholders and residents, and iterative review across departments, proposals, and other municipal decisions and initiatives. City Council worked with a team of experienced urban planners, architects, landscape architects, transportation planners, biologists, and others who researched every facet of Colwood, gathered comparative data, applied urban design principles and industry best practices. More than 1,400 members of this community provided input into the plan through 40 events and activities. City officials then analyzed the full data set alongside stakeholder input to draft a comprehensive policy document, which was approved by this council on August 27, 2018. Perhaps not this particular council, but your predecessor council. I pose the question, therefore, with all of that effort, expense, time, and business and community involvement, why? Why, after a mere 14-odd months, would this council entertain the recommended amendments to the plan and the associated rezoning applications? Certainly, the developers have not put forward either a cogent or compelling argument apart from their self-interest for doing so. It has been said by other real estate investment professionals that there is no other site with more than 400 acres located on 1.3 kilometers of oceanfront in a significant metropolitan area, either in British Columbia, in Canada, or for that matter, in the United States. It's a development of tremendous opportunity. The city of Colwood and those of us who reside in Royal Bay are very fortunate to have. Why then put all of that at risk? To the mayor, I say, you ran on a platform of pro-business. When many of us voted for you, we had no idea that pro-business meant pro-developer by doubling and tripling residential dwelling units at the expense of promised commercial development at Royal Beach and the Commons. I ask that you review your support of these amendments and take to heart the principles of the OCP, which the council you sat on in 2018 adopted. For the other 4 council members who appear to be steadfastly supporting this recommendation, despite the pushback you have received from the communities, I ask that you consider the interests of your city and your constituents over the mere wish to have yet unsubstantiated, yet accretive demands of these developers. For these reasons, I respectfully request Mayor and Council table a motion requiring city staff to enter into a meaningful dialogue with representatives of the community and representatives of the developers with a view to arriving at a real consensus on reaching a resolution. In closing, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the 2 councillors who have voted to deny these recommendations. Councillors Kobayashi and Day, thank you for your considered views on these proposals. Thank you for your courtesy.
Thank you. I have one last person. I'm hoping, can you hear me? If you're joining public participation, you're it.
Hello?
It is you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Martin and councillors. My name is Deborah McKenzie. I live at 3517 Ryder Hesjedal Way. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. While I am grateful for the opportunity to have time to express my thoughts as a citizen of Colwood during these challenging times, I feel the current process is slightly flawed in that the public is not able to seek clarification on specific agenda items once presented by staff and the applicants. These items are then being voted on by council with limited public participation, and therefore the process lacks the integrity of its intent. In having attended multiple city council and committee of the whole meetings since last fall, and having had emailed and made calls to the city directly, along with having had several in-person conversations with staff at City Hall, I find our current parking standards are in need of further review prior to making any changes to the OCP. It is my understanding that the zoning numbers for the Royal Beach development have not yet been approved, and therefore I do not support including and/or amending the OCP bylaws to accommodate the Royal Beach development at this time. The City of Colwood allowed a Royal Bay developer to post unenforceable parking signage throughout the development of Royal Bay North. These parking signs are no parking in fire lanes and also parking limit times. Because these signs do not have a bylaw number on them, they are unenforceable and therefore place the residents of Royal Bay properties at risk, as drivers can park their cars in fire zones with no consequence. I do not understand why developers commission to place unenforceable parking signs in a community within a city. Last summer, the parking limit signs were replaced with signs that depict how a person should park in a pullout between the trees. These new signs are also unenforceable and do not specifically address the lack of available parking for residents of Royal Bay North. The pullout, designed on Ryder Hesjedal Way, can only accommodate 2 cars, while there is plenty of space to have had them designed to accommodate 3 cars, similar to Caspian Drive. Living directly across from the high school, when school is in session, the students take up most of the street parking on Ryder Hesjedal Way, while there is a large new parking lot located at the end of Ryder Hesjedal Way. The cities of Langford and Victoria, along with other island communities, respect the citizens who live in such proximity to a high school and have placed parking restrictions on the parking directly across from high schools. When school is in session, parents park in the fire lanes and no parking areas daily. They do not park between the green trees when it is time to either drop off or collect the students from school. You as council are being asked to vote on off-street parking, and I would respectfully request that you revisit how you are going to support the current taxpayers of Royal Bay. As a resident and taxpayer, for all the times I have brought the issue of parking and lack of available parking forward, I have been left with a feeling that it is my problem, and there is no interest in making any changes to support this Royal Bay community and the parking problem that currently exists here. I request that you recognize that there is currently a lack of available parking in the community before you make any further reductions to the OCP. The future for many families in Colwood is very uncertain. I have watched with admiration as to the City of Langford and how they have approached and implemented programs to support their citizens through this crisis. I think there is a lot to be learned from the example they have set toward planning for times such as these that we are living through today. While I support a well-planned development in times of crisis, I feel there is a greater need for compassion and empathy for the citizens of the community as a whole, and the people's interests should be a priority and represented at City Council meetings. I believe there is a need to do better for the people of Colwood. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. I'm just going to confirm there is nobody else on my list. I do not see anyone else. So I believe that is the end of public participation. Moving on to Mayor's message. My apologies, Council. It's a little bit of a long message tonight. It's not directed to you, it's directed to the public, but I felt it was important to do it at least once And part of this is you'll sort of understand as it sort of goes, because it sort of outlines all the resources that residents in Colwood will have available to them. So these are unprecedented times, and I want to make sure that Colwood residents understand all of the economic supports available to them presently. I've broken this mayor's message down into government aids into 3 levels: federal, provincial, and the municipal. From the federal side, individuals and families, there has been a temporary salary top-up for low-income essential workers. In addition, there has been an increase to the Canadian Child Benefit. The federal government is providing up to an extra $300 per child through the Canadian Child Benefit for 2019-20. This will mean approximately $550 more for the average family. There is a special goods and services tax payment that is coming through. And to be honest, my daughter just received it yesterday, and it was for $400. So it will make a big difference for a lot of low-income earners. In addition, there is extra time to file income tax returns. The filing date for 2019 income tax refunds for individuals has been deferred until June 1st of 2020. Any new income tax balance due or installments are also deferred until after August 31st, 2020, without incurring any interest or penalties. In regards to mortgage support, the Canadian banks have committed to work with their customers on a case-by-case basis through the COVID-19 pandemic, and are willing to help those who are suffering through hardship. People facing loss of income, there is the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. The federal government will provide a taxable benefit of $2,000 for every 4 weeks, up to 16 weeks for eligible workers who have lost their income due to COVID-19. The Canadian Emergency Response Benefit is available to workers who will meet the following conditions: that they live in Canada, that they're over 15, that they've stopped working because of COVID-19, or that they're eligible for EI, and that is ending. They have not voluntarily quit their job, and they've had at least $5,000 worth of income over the last 12 months. For youth, post-secondary students, and recent graduates, there is the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit. The federal government is proposing that the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit that would provide support to students and new graduates who may not be eligible for the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit or employment insurance, or are unable to work due to COVID-19. This benefit would provide $1,250 per month for eligible students, or $1,750 per month for eligible students with dependents or people with disabilities. This benefit will be available from May until August of 2020. In addition, the federal government is launching a new national service initiative. The federal government is launching the Canadian Student Services Grant, which will help students gain valuable work experience and skills while they help their communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. For students who choose to donate national service and serve their communities, the new Canadian Student Services Grant will provide up to $5,000 for their education in the fall. Support for businesses. Avoiding layoffs and rehiring employees, the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. The Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy supports employers that are hardest hit by the pandemic and protects the jobs Canadians depend on. The subsidy will generally cover 75% of the employee's wages, up to $847 per week, for employees of all sizes and across all sectors who have suffered a drop in gross revenue of at least 15% in March and 30% in April and in May. The program will be placed for a 12-week period from March 12th until June 6th. Applications for this, for the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, actually opened today. So today was the day that you could first start applying for that. From the provincial government, funding for critical services has increased by $1.7 billion. The BC Emergency Benefit for Workers will provide a one-time $1,000 payment to people whose ability to work has been affected due to COVID-19. BC residents who receive the new federal emergency response benefit are eligible, including people who have run out of employment insurance benefits and now qualify for the ERBT. People will need to state that they have filed or will be filing a 2019 BC income tax return and complete the application form for the BC emergency benefit for workers. Online applications for this one-time payment will be available opening May 1st. So that's this Friday. There is a climate action tax credit. The one-time enhancement to the climate action tax credit will be paid in July of 2020 for moderate to low income families. An adult will receive up to $218. A child will receive $64, and people need to fill out their income tax to be eligible for that credit. Renters, homeowners, and people experiencing homelessness. Funding for housing supports are increased to ensure people can maintain their housing in events of job loss or income loss. A temporary rent supplement is available. Eligible households with dependents can receive up to $500 a month. Eligible households without dependents will receive $300 a month. This supplement will be paid directly to the landlords. BC student loans. Starting March 30th, 2020, BC student loan payments are automatically frozen for 6 months. Monthly bills, BC Hydro. BC Hydro rates have been reduced by 1% effective April 1st. BC Hydro residential customers who have lost their job or are unable to work as a result of COVID-19 will receive a bill credit of 3 times their average monthly bill. This credit does not have to be paid back. Eligible customers can apply for the bill relief until June 30th of 2020. Small businesses in BC Hydro's small general services rate category forced to close due to COVID-19 can have their power bills forgiven for electricity used between April and June of 2020 with no repayment scheduled. Small businesses can start applying the week of April 14th and have until June 30th to complete the application. Residential and commercial customers can defer bill payments or arrange for flexible bill payments with no penalty through the COVID-19 Customer Assistance Program. Customers experiencing job loss, illness, or wage loss due to COVID-19 can also access grants up to $600 to pay their hydro bills through the Customer Crisis Fund. ICBC, customers on a monthly payment and for facing financial challenges due to COVID-19 may defer their payments for up to 90 days with no penalties, excuse me. Fortis BC, residential Fortis BC customers can sign up for the COVID-19 Customer Recovery Fund to automatically have their bills deferred from April to June 30th, 2020. Tax relief for businesses. The following provincial taxes have been deferred, delayed, or reduced. There has been a deferred tax payment for businesses, a delayed PST budget 2020 tax changes, the delay in the carbon tax increase, and a 50% reduction in the school tax for businesses. For municipal governments, for the residents of Colwood, we also understand from a municipal standpoint that the success of Colwood's recovery depends on how we help our residents and businesses through these challenging times. On tonight's agenda, there is a proposed 0% residential tax lift and a business tax reduction over the next 5 years that will match the average business rate in the CRD. I do have to comment on that, and I'm going off script for just a moment. I was disappointed when I heard a couple of people in public participation say that that wasn't enough. And I understand that that's, we're working very hard. There are only 2 jurisdictions within Greater Victoria that came in with a 0% tax lift. That is Victoria and ourselves. Everyone else came somewhere between a 1% and a 5% lift in this year. And I congratulate this council that they were able to fine tune the dollar amounts to get to a 0. I think we're being very proactive when it comes to taking care of our residents in Colwood. In coordination with the South Island Prosperity Project, Councillor Kobayashi has been appointed to the Regional Prosperity Recovery Task Force. In addition, Councillor Kobayashi chairs the Colwood Development and Business Leader COVID-19 Recovery Roundtable that includes business leaders, the West Shore Chamber, and Council. These roundtables are designed to help the city understand the real impacts on local businesses and what we as a city can do, and the importance of advocating to our provincial and federal governments on how best to support local businesses moving forward. Just to reinforce that, I do have a call weekly with our MLA Mitzi Dean and our MP Randall Garrison, who are very in tune to what is happening from an environmental and from a economic standpoint for the city of Colwood. 3, city survey. To help us better understand how COVID-19 is impacting business owners, we invited all Colwood businesses to participate in a survey. We received 68 responses representing 16 business categories, including construction, finance, health, food and accommodation, professional and technical services, education, and more. Mostly from small businesses with between 1 and 4 employees, as well as from larger businesses that included up to 200 employees. About a third of the responses were from home-based business owners. Most respondents, 78% of them, were from private sector businesses. Excuse me. As expected, many are taking a hit in terms of decreased sales, closures, reduced staff hours, canceled contracts and layoffs, and most expect these impacts to continue for the foreseeable future. They offer ideas about how the city, the province, and the federal government can help them. Half the respondents expect the economic rebound to be slow. 35% are unsure at all. Staff are reviewing the data now and have a tentative date for a second business roundtable discussion to move forward with actions. In addition, this council and staff continue to work and focus on the health of our community, which continues to balance between staying vigilant as we continue to begin to loosen some of our restrictions, and we continue to follow the lead of our provincial health officer. As well, we have continued to work on protecting vulnerable populations. I can point to the approval of the affordable housing unit at 85 Belmont as an example to that. And I think it's very important for the public to understand that we are working, more than 40 hours a week. I can guarantee you on that from a staff standpoint, trying to make sure we build a community and that we're ready, that when we come out of this from an economic troubles, that we're prepared and ready to grow as a city. I wanted to end with one last story, and I really wanted to end with something very positive. So I wanted to just share a really quick story. There is a bed and breakfast, Birds of the Feather bed and breakfast at the end of Portsmouth Drive. They, on average, they rent those rooms out at $250 a night. And I know since March 15th, they have opened up all of their rooms at no charge and are allowing essential service workers to stay 1 week at a time, so that they could be, and I was speaking to the owners, and they used a couple examples. There was an RCMP officer who didn't want to go home, was concerned that he didn't want to spread that to his family, and so was happy to have the individual stay at the bed and breakfast. There's I think 3 other nurses who are also staying there because it's much more convenient, and then also that they don't have to. There was one nurse who I know lived in Port Renfrew, and so that person didn't have to make that drive every day because they were working so many overtimes. So I mean, easy enough to think. Do the math. If you got 4 rooms and you're making $250 a room, that's $1,000 a night. That's $30,000 a month. One business has lost in revenue. And so we can see how this is going to affect our communities dramatically in the months to come. So we're going to need to be nimble, we're going to need to be supportive, and we're going to need to be out there helping as best we can. That concludes my remarks, but I will look to council if there's anything council would like to share. If you don't mind raising your virtual hand, because again, I can't see 2 people. So, and I see nobody's raising their hand. So I'm going to move on then. On to 6.1, which is the adoption receipt of the minutes for the regular council meeting of April 14th. May I have a mover and seconder, please?
Moved, Kobayashi.
Thank you.
I raised my virtual hand.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Any discussion? Councillor Day.
There we go. Just on the minutes, there's a little small typo. The next meeting for 6.2 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes, it says to Monday, but it should have said Tuesday.
Thank you. Anything else? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in opposition? Seeing none, that passes. Moving on to 6.2, Committee of the Whole meeting. 6th. May I have a mover and seconder, please?
I'll move it as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Day, and then Councillor Parkinson is the seconder. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any in opposition? Hearing none, we will move on. That passes. Moving on then to 7, new business. 7.1, Carrie Clark, off-street parking standards for Latoria South and Royal. I will invite Ms. Clark to introduce the item.
Thank you, Your Worship. How is my volume? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm going to open up my PowerPoint for you. Okay, so I am presenting the proposed off-street parking standards for Latoria South and Royal Bay. This is a joint proposal given the proximity of two developments to one another and to the adjacent transportation network and transit. Before I start, I'd like to indicate that the consultants and developers are with us tonight and will be available to answer any technical questions that you may have. The staff report includes the following recommendation for multiple residential and commercial parking standards to be included within the draft zoning bylaw. The staff report also includes the following policy to be included within the draft OCP amendment bylaw to allow future consideration of parking variances with increased transportation options as the development builds out. So an application was received to amend the OCP and to rezone portions of the Royal Bay area plan. Pre-zoning conditions require the submission of a parking study. To date, the land use concept has been presented for Royal Beach back in February and just last week for Latoria South. So this staff report provides a summary of the parking analysis of the two parking reports submitted. To give you a bit of background, Latoria South and Royal Beach are located in the Royal Bay plan in South Colwood, as indicated by the blue and the orange on this plan. So the parking standards will apply to the areas outlined by the red dash. The commons and the transition area west of Ryder Hespedal Way, as shown on the conceptual Latoria South plan, and to the landing and the bluffs located along Metchosin Road, as shown on the conceptual Royal Beach plan. The parking standards will not apply to other areas of Latoria South and Royal Beach. They will not apply to Royal Bay North or to any other area within the city of Colwood, only to these areas shown on the plan. So we have received two parking reports, one from Urban Systems for Latoria South and one from Watt Consulting for Royal Beach. Both of these parking recommendations are based on observing parking demand at similar sites in Victoria, background and technical resources, as well as results from other studies. So the residential parking demand was determined by in-field observations of representative sites. These are sites that are seen as similar to the development proposal. The findings were adjusted based on the time of day factor, which is an addition of approximately 10%, parking by unit size or bedroom number, and an additional 15% was added as a safety factor to come out to the proposed parking standards. So table 1 on this slide shows the adjusted parking demand by bedroom number for both Latoria South and Royal Beach. And the final column shows the proposed standards jointly agreed to by both parties. The commercial parking demand was also determined by in-field observations of representative sites. The adjustment factors considered a 50% increase for a daily variation factor from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. A seasonal variation of an increase between 30 to 40% was also applied. This would account for your Christmas vacation parking demand at shopping centers. No weekend adjustment was given or was applied to office, which typically operates between Monday and Friday. So table 2 shows the adjusted parking demand by use for both Latoria South and Royal Beach, and the final column shows the proposed parking standards. So the table on the slide shows a comparison of the proposed standards to the City of Colwood Land Use Bylaw. The Land Use Bylaw calculates multiple residential parking through a complex calculation based on floor area, and it does not include visitor parking. The proposed parking standards recommend standards by bedroom number and include visitor parking requirements. Commercial parking will meet the current bylaw standards for office and propose a reduction to the retail and grocery parking standards. The following policy is recommended to support future variances based on reducing single occupancy vehicle use and ownership. The policy is based on decrease in parking demand associated with sustainable transportation and transportation demand management as the development builds out. And I'd like to be clear that this would be an application to council and would require approval by council through a public process. So the staff report provides a discussion of comparable parking standards. Nanaimo has recently adopted a new parking standard as of 2019, which includes parking by area and bedroom number. The map on this slide shows a variety of colors, and the table at the bottom of the slide shows a parking requirement for each of those colors. So area 5 in purple is Nanaimo downtown. Area 4, which is red, it implies the commercial centers. And area 3 is the higher density residential that surrounds the commercial areas. And the yellow, area 2, is lower density residential, and then it fades out to the remainder of Nanaimo, which is suburban or rural in nature. So the table at the top of the slide shows the proposed parking standards relative to area 3 and area 4. So this is somewhere between the commercial parking and the higher density residential, which is reflective of the proposal for the commons and for the landing in Latoria South and Royal Beach. Further comparison to other BC municipalities are shown on this slide. Municipalities that have parking standards by bedroom number were chosen. The second to last column provides an average of all of these municipalities' parking standards, and the final column provides the proposed parking standards. So the proposal is comparable to the average of all these municipalities. Visitor parking is the most diverse between all of the municipalities, so it is not a one-size-fits-all. The same municipalities were used to compare commercial parking standards. In general, the proposed parking standards in the last column for retail and grocery are higher than the average, which is the second to last column. And office is lower than the average, but no changes are recommended other than what is currently permitted in the land use bylaw for office parking. It is common for developers to propose alternative standards for parking, particularly since the land use bylaw has not been updated for some time. Policy to support future parking reduction is recommended to encourage the request to be based on development build-out and increased transportation options. Further public transit improvements are expected with development build-out, and this includes frequent transit network as well as a transit exchange located in Royal Bay. So the staff report identifies OCP objectives and policies to support changes to the parking standards, as well as alternative transportation options. These are included in the slide as a reflection of what's included in the staff report. So there is no communication associated with this report. However, I'd like to express that the opportunity for public input will still be provided with first and second reading of the bylaws, and a public hearing is also required. And the city will provide notification as per the Local Government Act. So the following options have been included within the staff report and are again provided on the slide for your reference. And that concludes my presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Coming to council. Council, I will look for a motion and then we can go to discussion. Do I have a mover and seconder on a motion? There were a couple options out there.
Are you wanting a virtual hand, Your Worship?
No, I was looking for, oh, thank you. I didn't see it. Thank you. No, I was looking for a mover and a seconder. So it can be verbal or it can be a hand. So right now we don't have a motion in front of us. So before we begin discussion, I'd like to have a motion, please.
I'll move the staff recommendation to get the motion discussion started.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss this.
Okay, Parkinson, then I'm going to drop everybody's hands because now I have a motion. So discussion, please put up your virtual hands and I will take it, but I'll go by order. Councillor Baxter, then Day, then Parkinson. And Councillor Baxter, there you go.
I'm unmuted. Got there before you. I just want to reference the no communication is required for this report. The report itself is communication. The public meeting that we're in right now is communication. The public participation we've had is communication. And I've seen previous reports that said no communication will be carried out beyond the normal public meetings and public hearings. And I would think that's a more accurate statement. And I'm just saying all this to suggest that we not in future say no communications required for this report when the very report itself is an active communication. It's rather inflammatory thing to say. Moving on to address some of the comment we had, I just want to ask, are the time constraints for public participation in this meeting any different than they have always been in previous years?
I will, if you're addressing me, Councillor Baxter, I did let it go much past the 20 minutes just because we're just sort of trying to figure out how to do this. Is that what you were referring to?
So in other words, the 20-minute limit is there as it always has been and is largely ignored in order to allow everybody to speak as it always has been.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm just puzzled as to how the public participation is any different And if anybody can explain that to me offline after the meeting, I would love to hear that. So addressing the parking specifically, I just want to ask one specific question of staff. Is 360 Latoria included in any of this? My impression is from the documents it is not.
Correct. It's not.
Okay, thank you. And I've been in Colwood for 14 years now and worked here a lot of that time. And I've never seen anybody park on lawns. I've seen it in Langford, but I've never seen it here. And I just wonder if staff have any record of any complaints of people parking on lawns, or any have ever seen anything like that. I'm taking that as
Hi,
a no.
Michael.
Yeah.
We have not received any complaints. I think maybe there is reference to parking in West Hills, which may have resulted in some lawns being turned into parking. As our bylaws stand right now, we do not require that or allow that.
Yeah, that's where I've seen it, in West Hills, which is in Langford. And that's because they're extremely small yards.
Councillor Baxter, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second, Councillor Baxter.
Yeah.
Mr. Moeller has put up his hand to respond to that question.
Thanks very much, Mayor Martin, and sorry for the interruption, Michael. Yeah, no, we have not permitted any lawn parking. There's been some situations where it's been proposed for the use of secondary street parking, and it has not been accepted by staff because our bylaw requirements are quite specific on it. I'm not aware of any sites in Colwood where that's been a situation, but I also have not asked bylaw to specifically tell me about it, and I can follow up after this if so directed.
Okay, I'd appreciate it if we did get that follow up for a future meeting. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. So I want to refer to the future considerations where it says future parking reductions. And it seems to me that should be adjustments. There seems to be an assumption in there that it would only be reduced, it would never be increased. And I think that given the fact that Royal Bay is a unique place, it's at a location that has a different effect because it's a long way from really good public transport at the moment, although it won't be, we hope, in the future. I think that the actual experience we have here with parking as it gets built out, which happens probably over 20 years for the commons, will help us to adjust the parking requirements. And I understand that in the development agreement, it will allow for, I believe, the approving officer of the city, at any rate, to require a parking study every 3 years to review how we're doing with parking. So I'd just like to give staff an opportunity to comment on that.
Sorry, Michael, thank you very much. And through the chair, parking for on-site is something that's established inside the zoning bylaw. To consider it would require a reconsideration of council, which would involve the public process of reopening up that zoning, the zoning particular, where the approving officer has the ability to affect and can affect locally as per each subdivision plan is the off-site or the street parking ratio. And we've had a couple of reviews of parking done in Royal Bay North. Matter of fact, we just undertook it in September at the start of a school to make sure that we were aware of what was going on as school started up and to try and get a good presence out there. And insofar, I haven't come forward and amended the street parking ratio at this time. One of the callers, though, did speak to signage, and the signage is something that we felt that we've had it to add. And if you'd like to ask questions about that, I'm available to answer them.
Okay, sorry, that was another question I had. I've never heard of a requirement for a bylaw number on a sign to make it enforceable.
That's, I'd need to refer directly. Typically with the enforceability of signs, they have to be clear, legible, and clearly understood by the users. So where signage has typically fallen down is, and I'm not saying it has, but where it typically falls down is when you put up one sign that says no parking and then put an arrow with an ambiguous end. So what we've done instead is we've identified the available parking with a sign at the front and the back end of that parking stall. And the caller, I didn't record their name and number, was correct when she said that the signage is up, telling people to park in the scallops, because that was the clean way to identify the start and limits to those signage so that they could be enforceable.
Okay, so as far as you're aware, all of our signs are enforceable.
That's correct.
Okay. The next obvious question is, are they enforced?
So I can't speak to the day-to-day operations, but what I can do is speak to the check-in procedure that we had established at the start of a school. And granted, that is a number of months ago. So that was September, October, November. We hit the area quite aggressively to make sure that the new students coming in and returning students were aware of the presence and the impact that they've made on the neighborhood. At the time, I don't believe the bylaw actually was in a position to write that tertiary or secondary ticket to actually bring a fine about. They went through the normal notification protocol and then the warning step, and I'm not aware of them actually levying a ticket with the fine. They felt that their warning and the personal engagement that they'd undertook had met successful results at the time.
Okay, but the basic problem that the current residents have is living next to a high school. And I think probably the only steps we could take there is some sort of resident-only parking regulation, which wouldn't limit anybody to park only in front of their own house, but would limit parking on a particular street to people who live there or people who are visiting people who live there. And these things are hard to enforce, but there is a system that works. And I intend to discuss that with staff at another time to see if there's any possibility of introducing that. But as to the motion that has been made, I'd like to suggest two reasons not to proceed with that particular motion. One is that I'm pretty sure that we promised that everybody would have 3 weeks from the introduction of something at Committee of the Whole to give their input before it is the bylaws adopted by council or the resolution is adopted by council. And because this doesn't actually lead immediately to a bylaw. And that's why that was on the agenda at the last Committee of the Whole, and would then be on the agenda at the council meeting after this. So everybody got the heads up at the last meeting that this was going to be discussed. We're discussing it now a week late, but we're still discussing it. And I would suggest that council not adopt this until 2 weeks hence, when we will have fulfilled the 3 weeks. And that when it is addressed, that we make that other change of adjustment instead of reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. The list is Councillor Day, Councillor Parkinson, Councillor Kobayashi, then Councillor Jensen. Councillor Day.
Thank you. First of all, a question to Ms. Clark. Just in regards to the report spoke to different areas and what their parking schemes were, as in technically what the numbers of parking spaces were, but it did not speak at all to what it cost or how that was enforced. So one of the things that I've become aware of, for example, in the city of Victoria, is the cost for patrolling the parking schemes there and the various measures that have been going on, particularly for me, attending business meetings downtown with the Capital Regional District or other communities where I've participated. And those parking issues come with considerable tax pressures to ensure that the streets are used appropriately. So I'm wondering if Ms. Clark could explain why that wasn't part of the study.
Thank you, Councillor Day. This report is dealing with on-site parking, so off-street parking, and this is considered private property. So we do require them to meet the bylaw or the numbers as approved in a variance. It would be the on-site owner's responsibility to ensure enforcement of their own parking. And again, this is for multiple residential and for commercial parking within the commons. On-street parking would not be enforced by the city, other than through a DP to ensure the correct number of parking stalls are implemented.
So I guess I'm confused, because if we get it wrong and there isn't sufficient parking for the residents or the retail users or the office workers, then the alternative for them is going to be on-street parking, which we would have to then manage in some way, and there would be costs associated with doing that. So that was not considered at all in this report?
No, this report did not consider costs associated with on-street parking.
Okay, thank you. And just because I happen to have been here for too long, Councillor Baxter, I could tell you of at least 3 addresses within South Colwood where people have been and have even formalized parking in their front yards. And sometimes that's been done by converting the yard to driveway, but it's certainly, I can think of 2 addresses on Wishart Road and certainly Painter Road, where there's been multiple issues. And again, it's often around school zones that cause the issues. So off the top of my head, when I was reading the report, I came up with 13 roads in Colwood where we have had numerous complaints from the residents. They include all areas of Colwood, Goldstream, Whale, Ocean Boulevard, Souk Road, Aloha, Painter, Carindale, Latoria, Pondside, Robe, Drive, Ryder Hesjall Way, and even Bunker Road in Colwood, probably 24 years ago, was the source of many of our bylaw issues to do with home-based business parking issues. So parking issues are big for our residents, and particularly where suites or schools are prevalent, where you know, the use of a particular property may evolve over time. And I am concerned about the cost to enforce parking schemes on our streets, which will lead to creating additional pressures when a better outcome could be attained by ensuring that there is sufficient parking. And then if somewhere further down the road, it is identified by whether it's a strata council or how that comes forward, but that they have additional parking that's not being used, it is possible to monetize those parking spaces and actually provide money back to the residents who live in a development where, maybe the parking isn't as needed now as it was envisioned when the place was first built. So that could be done in a number of ways, whether it's by renting out those parking stalls to local businesses nearby, or to office buildings, or offering a site for a food truck vendor to park and provide another benefit to the community. So there are quite a few options that are available to the developed property if there is more parking than is required down the road. And I also agree with Michael that we did promise when we adopted the electronic meeting agendas that we would ensure that we gave people a full 3 weeks to let us know their thoughts before we would move forward with an item. That's it for me.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. If council is desirous, administration can certainly return with a report from the bylaw team respecting the number and area of complaints, the number of warnings, and the number of tickets for on-street parking issues, notwithstanding that we're discussing off-street parking issues on tonight's agenda.
Thank you. I will go to Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Firstly, maybe just overview, if I could summarize where I think we're at on this. So what we have in front of us is off-street parking for the commons, the landing, a little bit of the bluffs, I think, a little bit of headlands, and a little bit of the transition zone in Latoria South, which means the rest of those sites, the rest of Latoria South and the bluffs and the rest of the headlands, I might have them backwards, would follow the current City of Colwood parking standards, which is what's been followed in Latoria North. And in Latoria North, as I understand the situation, overall there's good parking. It probably needs a bunch more management. We've heard about issues with suites, both legal and illegal. We've heard about kids not wanting to park in the school parking lot because it's another 50 yards from the school they'd have to walk and things like that. But I don't think we've heard that overall there isn't enough parking. It's just not being managed well, which might be a different subject, as has been brought up. We're not here to talk about off-street parking, although I'm going to jump right into that pretty soon, or on-street parking. So I think that's the case. If anybody disagrees, jump in, but I think that's where we're at. So then what we're looking at is the landing, the commons, and those other couple of areas where we have a proposal to use the parking standards that are in front of us that seem to have been cross-referenced and checked and looked at in a number of different ways. Not 100% sure what comparables were used locally. I think we heard Royal Bay talk about trying to hit the missing middle market in their things, and that might have a parking number that's appropriate. Royal Beach, I think we have to expect that's going to be a pretty spectacular and high-end place. I would suspect that might even have a different parking number. But these are the numbers we have in front of us. And theoretically, my gut tells me that it's kind of the developer's problem. You know, he wants to sell a nice, beautiful suite somewhere and says, but I've only got half a parking stall for you. That might be a little harder to sell than if he's built enough parking to go along with the quality of the suites he's trying to market. So, you know, my sort of theoretical bias is it's a developer's problem. If he if he doesn't build enough parking for the office, for instance, he's going to lose out on the employees who like to drive to work and very much enjoy driving against the flow of traffic. So these are decisions that developers will have to make as they build their projects. And all that would be fine if they got it right. And if they had too much parking, we could all be, as Councillor Day spoke earlier, there's solutions for that. If there's not enough parking and it spills out into the street, I think we have a big problem. We have issues with, the rest of the residents want to come down to use the commercial zones or to go to the beach or to visit down there. And so to me, I could accept these parking standards if we could at the same time ensure that in these areas we're talking about, the public parking, whether it's been in a parking lot, a parkade, or on the street, is all pay parking. I think we're going to have to go to pay parking. That's a big step for a city like ours. I don't think we have any yet. But that's, to me, that's the way it works. That if there is a spillover from one of these buildings that didn't do it quite right or didn't build a spot for the guy's F-150 truck that he wants to, needs for work and doesn't have a place to park it within the whatever the developer built, they can't just be taking up the street parking and not leaving any for the businesses will go berserk if people can't get to their business because there's no parking. They'd much rather have pay parking than full stalls full all day with people not coming into their store. So while I agree that we probably need this a little bit of time to stew to make sure that it has the required time for the public input, at the appropriate time, I'm going to make a motion that in these areas we're talking about, that the public parking be all pay parking.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson, you're done?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor. I do agree with Councillor Baxter and Councillor Day that I'm not ready for this yet. I certainly want to do some more homework on this. I do want to consult with the public a little more. And I was really interested in that, the fact that, and I don't really understand why we selected Nanaimo to benchmark ourselves against. I know they did comparisons, but I do want some, if one of the staff members could explain why we selected Nanaimo. Because to me, I look at the benchmarks being, I mean, we're another West Shore community like View Royal, like Langford, and I notice our standards are lower than their standards. And I was very surprised to see that was what was recommended. And so I looked at the Langford ones and I went, this seems more reasonable. I mean, their numbers seem more reasonable, and I would have been more acceptive of their standards, because once you set that standard, the very fact that we're talking about reducing later on, but once we lower them, it's so much harder to go back and change the standards to be higher. And I do have a lot of questions, but what I was going to do, Mayor, was I was going to actually forward them off to staff and get some of the, because a lot of the wording in here where they talked about representative communities or representative municipalities, I didn't know exactly what they meant, like which ones were they, because I compare ourselves more, of the Western communities where we're more car-centric here, because most of the jobs are in the city and we are car-centric here, and we don't and we won't have for a while the transit to support just the service or the frequency. And so that does concern me, and so I'm not ready to vote on this, to tell you the truth. So yeah, that's all my comments are. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Jensen, I see Mr. Moeller has his hand up. So Mr. Moeller.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just wanted to address some of Councillor Kobayashi's questions, which were excellent. Many of the traffic consultants, especially Watt and Bunt, the two primary consultants for the region, have been quietly not including Langford, largely because their parking standards are well more aggressive than anything elsewhere seen in the West Shore. They're even comparable to a downtown Victoria standard in many cases. When they're used as a comparable, they tend to pull the ratios lower in terms of the parking necessities, because their standards are so aggressive, especially in their downtown core. And their downtown Goldstream, for example, is, or Jacqueline or Belmont Market, is well served with much higher frequency transit, as well as the Exchange located on Station Avenue. And Langford, I don't wish to speak to them, feels confident in their standards as being met and well served by transit. We aren't quite as well served by that frequent transit network, and so have reduced Langford as that comparable viable, so that the standard as proposed is not artificially reduced by that comparison. If you'd like a one-to-one, line-to-line comparative, we could certainly bring that forward to provide you more information.
Through the mayor, just to follow on that, but maybe I'm looking at a different chart than you are, but
No, you're right.
The city of Langford is higher than ours. Am I not correct? Table 6?
No, that's correct. But it's the ratios in the areas in Langford that they've picked, and it's all relevant to their specific zones. So we did provide that comparative. You're correct on page 10 of the report. If there's any further questions, I'm sorry that I can answer them for you. But yeah.
Brent, before you continue, I have two other staff hands. I have Nadine King from Watt Consulting has put her hand up, so I will let her speak to this. I will unmute her. There you go. Nadine, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and address a couple of comments and provide some clarity. Specifically to Councillor Day's comment around businesses in single family houses and that sort of thing. And as Councillor Parkinson indicated, we're not requesting a variance on the single family rate. So that would remain the same as the bylaw today. What this focuses in on is the multifamily areas of the site, as well as the office and commercial retail space. To answer Councillor Kobayashi's questions, we took several approaches, and in reviewing Urban's report, they took very similar approaches, and we identified similar sites, but not necessarily identical. What we try and do when we look at what we call similar sites is we try and look at places that have similar walk scores, similar transit scores, similar bike scores. So, you know, we would not want to compare Royal Bay, Royal Beach today to, for example, like a downtown Victoria or a downtown Langford even. We tried to select sites, for example, in our report that were on Arncott Road, or even Jacqueline. Well, it's a busy road, actually doesn't have very good transit service on it, depending on what section of the road you're in. And then we also did some comparisons to places like Nanaimo. And part of the reason Nanaimo was selected is that it has, number one, it is fairly new and recent. And so they have gone out and actually done in Nanaimo counts and updated their bylaw. By comparison, the town of View Royal's bylaw is about 6 years old now, and didn't necessarily go through as strong of a rigorous data collection process to adjust the numbers for their information. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you will see a difference if you look between the the Urban report and the Watt report, in that Watt actually had lower rates, slightly lower rates than Urban. And then even those rates we've added anywhere from, just pull up my numbers, I think sort of 5% to almost 50% higher than what we actually expect to see for the demand. And so there's sort of that comfort that, you know, as the site grows, the numbers will get closer to what Watt's actually and Urban observed in other places in Greater Victoria. And when I say Greater Victoria, I mean Western communities, you know, more rural, suburban Saanich, central Saanich. types of places. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on around was the parking for public parking. Royal Beach is actually going to have a 66 public parking lot dedicated for the parks and the beach, and people coming to just enjoy the experience of being there. That would be in addition to the off-site requirements and in addition to on-street parking that may be developed. There will be this additional parking spot to help deal with any potential overflow that may occur at the beginning of the project. So I hope that provided some clarity there, and here if you need more.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go to Dan Casey next, who's with Urban Systems. He had his hand up as well, so I will look to Dan.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me here?
Yes.
Excellent. Just to add on to Nadine's overview, and it was a very good overview, I'll add that you can take pretty good comfort that these two parking studies, Urban Systems and Watt, were done separate and independent of one another, and the results came back remarkably similar. So there's some comfort to be had in that. The other thing I wanted to point out is there's been a little bit of discussion over the past few minutes on cross-comparing municipal bylaw requirements between municipalities. And that's one way of looking at this. And it's kind of a, make sure you're in the range that other communities are. More important in my mind, and I know the Watt study included some of this material as well, is actually getting out in the field and observing how similar sites are exhibiting parking demand characteristics. So whether that's looking at already existing condo or apartment buildings, or looking at office or mixed commercial sites, that actually gives us probably a more accurate comparison of what the parking needs of these sites might actually be. I know in both studies, the in-field data collection and observations were undertaken. And then as Nadine was explaining, there were also factors applied on top of that. So we're not just taking, in both studies, not just taking what we saw, the average of what we saw in the field. There's actually been growthing up from the averages that we're seeing in the field. And those growth rates are what you actually see in front of you.
Thank you. I'm going to go next to Councillor Jensen, but just before Councillor Baxter, I'm just doing the list. So it'll be Jensen, then Councillor Baxter, then Councillor Day, and then Councillor Parkinson. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Your Worship. A few things. I made some notes as we went along, and I agree with many of the comments from my council partners, but a couple of things. First one is not relevant to this, but help me out. But the 3 weeks notification was at the early part of our discussion on how we were going to conduct meetings. And that was when we were not considering having the public involved directly with our meetings. And we've taken to resolve to do that, where other communities have not allowed for it, and they've gone strictly with electronic as far as email submissions and written submissions, and that's it. So I think we've taken a big step forward, and I don't think that we need to necessarily consider that 3-week waiting period. That's my comment on that bit. But as far as the parking goes before us this evening, I'm heartened in many areas. First off, just as was discussed, the increase, sort of the buffer increase across the board in many areas. I think that shows that the applicants are certainly willing to recognize that parking is a consideration for our community, the community has strong feelings on this, as we're hearing from Royal Bay North. I am concerned that I quite frankly have never compared us with Nanaimo for pretty much anything. And I mean, it's not a knock on Nanaimo, but it's just not my go-to. So, I mean, I'm not a traffic scientist by any stretch, but, and I'm not sure what metrics they use, but I mean, there's so many other locations I would go with before Nanaimo, and even before Langford for that matter. But off the top of my head, we compare ourselves all the time to White Rock. And I've yet to hear someone come forward and compare us with White Rock in relation to parking. yet they're quick to go out and draw the comparison to our beachfront, the beachfront development. So I find that interesting. And similarly, I mean, I spent many years going to Kelowna in the summers, and I find that their downtown area and their lakefront has a lot of similarities. And again, we seem to be very much ethnocentric within our province. Surely there's communities in Washington State that have parking standards for a similar community. So that's more a comment, and I'm sure there's some reasons, and I'm sure the applicant's going to tell us all about them as soon as I'm finished here. But I'm confused by the strong relationship with Nanaimo. Nanaimo is extremely spread out. And their downtown core area, yes, it has some waterfront, but it's a working waterfront with a marina and a ferry terminal and stuff like that. Like I don't see a lot of correlation. It's also a protected harbor where ours isn't. So I'd love to hear some feedback on that. So now, having said all that, I do draw a big distinction between the on-street and off-street parking. And I do like the fact that the parking is going to come back to the approving officer every couple of years or 3 years or whatever Brent said there. But I'm wondering, does that come back to council? That's a question for staff. And I am chewing on an amendment to the proposed motion here. If we get some feedback on Brent and what that looks like, that would be great.
Sure. Sorry, Brent, just before you do, I do have Carrie with her hand up as well. So I was thinking maybe Carrie could jump in just before the approving officer thing, and then I'll let you jump in on that. So, Mrs. Clark.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to comment on the references that several of the councillors have made towards comparison to City of Nanaimo standards. And the reason why the Nanaimo standards and the other municipalities are reviewed is mainly to demonstrate parking standards by bedroom number, that there are other municipalities that have set it up this way. And Nanaimo, we just used as an example because it's the most recent one that we're aware of that is in British Columbia. And I agree it does not compare with the situation of Colwood, nor is it intended to. It's just to demonstrate that there are many municipalities that are setting up parking standards by bedroom number, and just to give you the range of what they might look like across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go to Mr. Muller.
Thank you. So once again, the approving officer has more authority at the time of subdivision and less authority at the time of building strata or commercial development. However, if there is a need on that review cycle to challenge the on-site parking ratio, as I've expressed with Councillor Baxter's questions, as those are contained in the zoning bylaw, it would need to come back to council for consideration. I would typically start with the proponent, express the need, we'd go to a study, and then that summary would come to council as an end result.
Thank you. And I hate to say it, and I've said it in the past, that we go through this with each development application because our parking standard is, shall we say, gone the way of the dodo. And I think that it behooves us to move on coming up with a new standard so that we don't have these discussions each and every time an application comes forward. And again, that's a comment, and that's for a future meeting. I do want to propose a bit of an amendment, Your Worship, and I apologize. It will be from the seat of my pants, but rather than having the approving officer, this fall to the discretion of the approving officer, I would like to see that this comes back to council every once in a while as the development proceeds. So it would be something along the lines, and I'm looking for some help, something along the lines of every 2 to 3 years that it comes back to council for an update and a review for any necessary adjustments as the development proceeds.
Okay, before I look for a seconder, I'm just going to look to our CAO. Who has put up his hand. So I will go to him first before I come back to you for the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Just relative to the comment of Councillor Jansen, administration are just in the process of finalizing a request for proposals to go into the market to update our global parking standards. So we won't be dealing with this on a case-by-case basis once we go through that process.
Thank you. Then I also see Mr. Muller's hand up. Did you want to address the proposed motion?
No, thank you for the option. It was to address, it was just going to say what our CEO was just indicated. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, then, Councillor Jensen, do you want to repeat it one more time? And I'll look for a seconder.
I mean, I'm open to wordings, but the bottom line is that, and I would like the chance to motivate afterwards to give some of my reasoning, but it'll read something along the lines of the recommendation, but we include an amendment that speaks to a review by council every 2 or 3 years. I'm open to some suggestions. Let's say 2 years to start with for review as the development proceeds.
All right, thank you. So that is an amendment to the motion, I'm assuming, Councillor Jensen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So do I have a seconder for that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, everybody's got their hands up for something else. So, so I do have a motion and a seconder. So I am going to clear, just give me a moment. I'm going to just write down the main motion, who's speaking next, so that I have the same order. Baxter, Dave, Parkinson. All right. I am going to clear everybody's hands. So give me a moment here.
Is there room for discussion before you take a vote there, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. I just you may start, Councillor Jensen, to motivate, and then I'll look for other speakers on the motion.
Thank you. While you're clicking away on your computer there, I'll motivate my counterparts here that I believe that this shouldn't fall to staff, that this should fall to the council of the day as this development proceeds. And let's not forget, this is not a bunch of buildings dropping in Royal Bay in a year and a parking nightmare. This is going to be phased and incremental. And I believe that as a building or a commercial area goes in, that we have a chance to take a deep breath, review it, perhaps conduct the enforcement as necessary or the education. And we can adjust this standard as we move along. This is a 20-year buildup. So I think to argue over, 0.2 of a car, per a studio suite here and there, really is not a valuable use of our time at this point in time, because I can't even wrap my head around it. That's my motivation.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, then Day. Councillor Baxter, hold on. There you go.
I will vote for the amendment, support it, but I will vote against the main motion when it comes up. In other words, I want to indicate that I'm in favor of that change when we do eventually pass this motion, but I'm not in favor of passing it right now, and I'd give a support to that. If you look at the agenda, the potential vending regulations for municipal lands are from a committee of the whole meeting 3 weeks ago. The other two are from committee meeting 2 weeks ago, because that was when the financial plan was done. Other issues that we discussed a week ago are not on this agenda because they're waiting 3 weeks. So I would say that the Councillor Jensen's interpretation that is not in application, the 3 weeks, is incorrect. It is actually being applied, and you can see it in this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to staff. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to clarify that part of the motion of the staff report for the land use concept for Latoria South included within a development agreement that parking standards would be reviewed every 3 years. So I'm not sure if that will have some difference to what you propose tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm gonna, just as a clarification question then, Ms. Clark. So is this motion, if this motion didn't say 2 years, it said the review should occur every 3 years. Is that already in the bylaw? Like, is that a mute thing then?
Your worship, so this recommendation is just to include standards within the bylaw itself. It's not making recommendations for the development agreement. So perhaps that could be the addition to your motion tonight, is to include to change that parking standard review every 2 years instead of every 3 years.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. Even before this amendment was on the floor, I found my page of notes. And the amendment speaks to the question that I wanted to raise before the amendment was raised. It's about whether or not this decision lies with council or with staff. And that is addressed on page 63 of 96 in the report. It says, in the meantime, to facilitate appropriate parking standards for future development, the parking studies consider a matrix for the basis of future parking reductions relative to current best practices and research. Policy incorporating a framework for parking reductions will provide a base rationale for presenting parking reductions through development variance permit applications. So this policy will be included within the OCP amendment bylaws. So my question and my concern is kind of twofold. One, we're only talking about parking reductions. We're not talking about parking adjustments, which is what was clarified earlier, that we need to keep an open mind to what adjustments may need to be made. And also that if it comes back through the development variance permit process, then I believe that puts council out of the loop.
So I'm sorry, Councillor Day, were you looking for an answer from staff on that?
Yes.
Okay.
To answer Councillor Day's question, a development variance permit does require council approval, so it will come back to council.
Okay. That wasn't my understanding, but the other part that I think needs to come into the equation, and we haven't had much discussion about it, and I'm not proposing a huge discussion item, but just that the supposition about transit, I think is not well enough developed. I know that the evolution of transit in the West Shore has really changed in the last 10 years. And through the development in Langford of the Langford Exchange, that has been at the expense of the Colwood Exchange. Basically, simply because there were no mechanisms available to transit to increase their service. So, you know, I'm not faulting them. They've done the best they can to stretch the resources that they have, but they don't have smart card technology. They don't know which areas are using their transit the most, and other than actual pass-ups where the buses are full, there doesn't seem to be any data that I've been able to find in regard to where the real transportation hubs are. You know, where is transit working well? We don't know those answers yet. And I'm not faulting transit. It's a matter of slim resources. But when we're talking about parking standards, we need to understand the environment that it's in, and transit is a big part of that. So I really think that we're only seeing a part of the issue in regards to that. I don't think that I can support the amendment that's here. It does try to, make sure that we are the most accountable level of governance. So this should be where people can come to talk about what is or isn't working in their community. So that part is good, but it seems like there's too many things still up in the air. Thank you.
Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Dean, I'm going to suggest that maybe you're off track on this. I think, we've heard that the approving officer can ask for parking studies. If people want to change them, there's a development variance permit that's required. We've heard that the development variance permit doesn't get approved unless it comes to council. If it's all that, you're asking for it to come to council, and I'm not sure anybody's quite clear if that's instead of a DVP or whatever. Maybe this is covered well enough. 3 years, 2 years, 3 years going to go by in a blink of an eye on a development like this. There won't be enough data probably to process in 2 years. I hear your concerns. I'm just not sure that we're not fighting for something that's not worth winning. I think more importantly to me, and this is something Michael alluded to, was that the policy statements that say, well, you might be able to reduce the parking if this happens or that happens or that happens. It certainly doesn't give us the control I think you were looking for to say it's not working, we need more parking. But frankly, when we zone this, that's what we've told the developer his requirements are. And to come along later, the market might tell him he's got to build more. I don't think council's going to be able to say, we've changed our mind, build twice as much parking on your next development, because he's going to say, no, I don't have to. And if I don't need to, I'm not going to. So I'm not sure you're going to get what you want out of that. I think we should perhaps focus more on these policy statements about perhaps reducing it without considering increasing it. And I guess my preference would be to take those out. But on this motion that you've got on the floor, I'm afraid I can't support you, buddy.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Kobayashi is next, but I'm just going to stop just for a moment. And Council, it is 9 o'clock. We are still on 7.1, and we are still talking about an amendment. We are not even on the main motion yet. We have the budget that we have to approve this evening. We have the 5-year fiscal plan that we need to approve this evening. So I would ask that that we consider it of our time. Because we're going to be here till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning if we keep going. Councillor Kobayashi has removed his hands from that. So, okay, we're good. I will go get, and Councillor Jensen has as well. So I'm going to go to, it doesn't look like anyone else has discussion on the amendment. So this is just the amendment, which was, I'm paraphrasing, but the amendment was to have council review the parking standards every 2 years. Correct? Councillor Jensen, give me a thumbs up or a head shake. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the amendment. And unfortunately, again, there are 2 people I cannot see. I cannot see Councillor Logan, and I cannot see Councillor Parkinson. So you'll need to give me a verbal. All those in opposition to the amended proposal?
Councillor Parkinson's opposed.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson, I'm just going to... Sorry, my apologies, Councillor Day. I'm just going to go through everybody. Councillor Baxter, oppose or opposed?
Unmute.
Yeah,
Unmute.
He's still not unmuted, but I can read his lips.
Sorry about that, Dean. I can't go for 2 years. I thought it was 3.
All right. So Councillor Baxter opposes. Councillor Day?
Opposed.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Opposed.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson opposed. Councillor Day, or excuse me, Councillor Logan.
Opposed.
Opposed. Councillor Jensen.
I'm in favor.
Thank you. I'll be in favor to help you, Councillor Jensen. So the amendment fails. Moving to the main motion then. We are still at the main motion. The motion was moved by Councillor Logan. I can't remember who seconded it. So I'm going to go back to my list. And the first person who not had an opportunity to speak on the main motion is Councillor Logan. So Councillor Logan, and then the rest of you put up your hands again if you want to speak a second time the motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to regurgitate all the points that were made, but Councillor Parkinson actually made a very good point that really struck me, and that is the tenants, whether they be commercial or residential, will really drive what the parking requirements are. And I know from other developments, the retailers have a fair amount of say in the amount of parking that that's required at a specific site, where it's located, whether above or below ground, that sort of thing. They, you know, the parking will dictate the success of a project. And so I appreciated Councillor Parkinson's comments about that. You know, I'm not fussed about who we can compare ourselves to. I have to leave that to the professional traffic engineers and our professional staff to review. But I will, you know, I also have to think that when we're viewing these parking standards, that we're viewing them with our car-centric hats on and not thinking about what the goals we're trying to achieve within the OCP, and that is really trying to maximize other modes of transportation to our commercial hubs. And sometimes, although it might be an unpopular thing to say, a little bit of parking pressure dictates a change in behavior. And I'm one to admit my behavior has changed because the parking challenges at West Shore Town Center. I walk instead of drive, even though it's only 5 minutes away. So, you know, Councillor Jansen also pointed out that this is a 20-year build out. So it's not like this this project's going to pop up overnight. I think we do have some time. And, you know, I do, one thing I do really appreciate is the how parking is described by bedroom. And that is easy for people to understand. What I see right now is seems reasonable to me. It seems to have struck a happy medium, so to speak. So, you know, it's not something that's not going to be reviewed over the years. This is the first kick of the can, and so I'm comfortable in approving this and to get the Commons going, because we're getting a lot of feedback from people both in Royal Bay and on the outskirts of Royal Bay, just to get going on it. And this is a big step. And just on the participation part, the public had opportunity to comment last week during public participation. This is only the first or the early stages of public participation. So we'll get some more comment, and it'll go to public hearing and all the other readings. So you know, I'm satisfied with moving this forward, confident that we'll get additional public feedback throughout the rest of the process. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I still have a question, and I too heard something that struck me, and that is around once we approve this, I feel like coming back, maybe trying to reinforce the barn after the horse is out. So perhaps staff could explain how this review every 3 years could result in changes.
Sorry,
So-
I'm sorry, Councillor Day, through the chair. So for clarity on the question, just to make sure I'm answering it correctly, you're asking how the process of a change would occur if it was, is that correct?
Right, so we're going to review this 3 years from now. And we decide that either we need to adjust it up or down. How does that happen?
Okay, so typically that would be through a text amendment if it was contained in the zone, or a public hearing if it was, if it was contained in the development agreement, or a public hearing if it was contained in the zone. The development agreement can speak to a ratio and speak to the timing, and any amendment to the development agreement would be through report to council, where council could then seek public input through the normal public participation component to the meeting, or could elect to hold a public hearing to gain better insight. If it was in the zone, it would just go the public hearing route to amend.
Okay, so I guess I need to fine tune my question a little bit. My question is about, so we've made this standard and the development area that it applies to has already been described, and there's been an amendment to our OCP as described in the report. So how could we possibly walk that back when the development has already been approved? They're not going to go for any standard that where we ask them to increase the amount of parking that they have.
So I again, tell me if I've missed the question. Any building or site that had already been developed would be exempt of any new consideration because it was already existing. So there'd be no ability to go back and say, oh, that piece of that site needs more parking. It now needs to be provided, because frankly, we're dealing with a built form and a different ownership group in all likelihood. It would have to be done prior to the issuance of a building permit or development permit, where acting together, we summed the land and said, now we need a parking study. We're at that 3-year threshold, or whatever that threshold of timeline is, or as noted, if it happened to be earlier. Council may choose to amend that. If noted, if council wished it to be earlier.
Okay, so really, once a building is built, there is no adjusting anything.
Sorry, just have to unmute. Once a building is built, that is correct. It is built. However, any future building could then suffer the consequence, so to speak, of that underscoring in that previous building. Because if it's in the zoning, council will have the option to say, no, we need that amended based on this new ratio. The staff would be required to bring that parking study with the meat and the information behind it, either going up or down, or whatever was relevant of the day.
Okay, thank you. So I will not be supporting this tonight because many of the areas that we've been compared to, West Kelowna, for example, very similar to the West Shore. It's kind of based on auto-dependent urban sprawl. They have very low ratios. I know the area very well. I have family who lives there. And, it has not helped their traffic issues. It has not helped their parking issues. They're still having all of the same issues that everybody else has, trying to get transit through traffic jams. So either way, the parking standards that Colwood already has, I think are better. They better serve our neighborhood and the bottom line for taxation in the future, because any enforcement scheme comes at a cost. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing no other hands up, so I'm going to call the question on the motion. Motion is the staff report recommendation. I know there has been people who verbalized that they are in opposition, so I am going to do a verbal record. So I'm going to go backwards this time. So Councillor Parkinson, are you there?
I'm here. I'm struggling.
Do you want me to come back to you?
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Logan.
In favor?
Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
In favor.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
I'm in favor with everything except for the multifamily, so I'm opposed, I guess, because I can't accept it all.
Okay, so you're in opposition. Okay. Councillor Day.
I'm opposed.
Thank you. Councillor Back.
Opposed.
Thank you. Forgive me, I have missed somebody. Who have I missed?
Councillor
Excluding myself. I'm sorry, who?
Councillor Parkinson.
Oh, right. I had to come back to Councillor Parkinson. Sorry, Parkinson.
Still struggling. In favor.
Favor. I vote in favor, so it passes 4-3. Moving on.
A point of order?
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor?
please, go ahead.
Can I make a motion about pay parking?
Oh, yeah, do you want to make that motion?
Yep.
Go
I
ahead.
move that administration be asked to return to council within 1 month with a report on implementing pay parking for all public parking in the landing, the commons, I guess the transition zone and the part of the bluffs that were referenced in this report.
Okay, do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, I will go to our Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question. Is this with respect to off-street public parking?
Not necessarily. If somebody wants to build some off-street public parking, that'd be nice, but on-street and if there is any off-street, I think we did hear a reference of about a 56 stall parking stall, which is going to get built. That'd be nice, but I would say all non-on-site parking.
Your Worship, if I may?
You may.
A study with respect to options for paid parking for both off-street and on-street would be substantive work, and administration could return within a month time with a scoping of what that might look like, together with a budget to bring forward the options in an appropriate manner. At the end of the day, it's not my belief that we could do justice to this consideration in a month, and I am likely of the belief that we're going to need to employ outside resources to help us with such, and as such, we would need a budget to do so.
Yeah, that works for me. I think come back with a scoping of what we should be talking about and how we should go about it would be ideal.
So just for clarification to our CAO, are you suggesting it can be pulled then, or are you still looking for a vote from council in regards?
Bill, thank you, Your Worship. With council's direction, administration can return within a month, but what we'll be returning with is a scoping of this idea, and we will not have advanced the thinking substantially beyond giving council an idea of how long it would take us, what it would look like, and who we might involve, and what those costs might be in terms of bringing forward an appropriate answer to this question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parkinson, are you comfortable with that?
Very comfortable with that.
Okay, so I'm going to assume you're going to withdraw your motion then?
I'm going to which?
Withdraw your motion? Or do you still want to vote?
Well, I think what he's saying is exactly what my motion says, so.
Well, but he's saying he can do it without a motion.
Did he? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Okay, I'll go back to our CAO.
Your worship, it would be helpful to better understand whether the will of council supported the motion of Councillor Parkinson.
All right, then I'll call the vote.
He was polite. He didn't add for once.
Uh,
I have a quick question before we vote.
Okay, actually, I have, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Day, then Councillor Logan.
Thank you. I want to clarify if the study that would come back would also talk about paying for parking within developments. So in some areas that I know of in the States, for example, when you buy your multi-unit, whatever it is, condo, apartment, whatever it is, the purchase of the parking spot is separate from the purchase of the home.
If I may, that would not be the intent of this motion. I think that would be something the developer will decide to do or not do. And maybe the way he gets his parking ratios down to the numbers that we've been talking about tonight. But I'm only interested in this motion on any public parking, just to prevent overflow from the sites, clogging up spaces that could be used for people frequenting the beaches or the businesses.
I will go to Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. Although I understand where my friend Councillor Parkinson is coming from, we're making an assumption that there is going to be a problem, not that there is a problem, and I just worry about directing resources, staff resources, to this subject right now. I'd rather have them probably focus on other subjects. Should it be a problem, then we can certainly address that, but I'm not sure that this time is the right time.
Seeing nobody else's hand is up, I'm going to call the question. Councillor Parkinson, do you want to read the question, or do you want to say it one more time for us?
I think my motion was, I move that sections of the report dealing with potential reduced parking requirements be eliminated. Oops, that's the second one that I didn't make. I move that administration be asked to return to council within 1 month with a report on implementing pay parking for all public parking in the landing, the commons, the transition zone, and the section of the bluffs referred to in the off-street parking standards report.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go through the list again. So if you can all unmute yourself. Councillor Baxter, are you for or opposed?
I'm assuming that that the motion refers only to a report on the scoping.
Well, okay, I'm going to stop. If you're asking questions, then I can't. I'm not going to call the vote and then start answering questions. So if
Okay.
Councillor Baxter, I will go back. I will not call the vote yet. If you have discussion questions, please go ahead.
So that's the only question I have, is that Councillor Parkinson restated his motion as it was before the CAO explained the timing difficulty. So I wonder if we might add in there a report on the scope of such a further report.
So report on scoping the implementation of pay parking for all public parking. Would that work for you?
Yeah.
I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to speak before I call the vote? Because I'm not going to let comments happen once I call the vote. So I'm giving one more opportunity. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call the vote then. Councillor Baxter, are you for or opposed?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Day, are you for or opposed?
For.
Thank you. Hanson?
Was that me? Sorry, you washed out. I'm for.
Yes, yeah, it was you. Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson?
For.
Councillor Logan?
Opposed.
And Mayor Martin opposes. So that passes 5-2. I'm going to move on then to 7.2, which is the potential vending regulation for municipal lands. This is a recommendation from the April 6th Committee of the Whole meeting. Mr. Buchan is available to answer any questions. May I have a mover and seconder on the recommended motion or a motion, and then I'll have discussion.
So moved.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi moves it. Do I have a seconder? I will second, just to keep us moving. Discussion. Just giving people a time. Is there any discussion on this? Seeing none. Oh, yeah, Councillor Parkinson, Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, sorry to be slow there, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank staff for clarifying the evaluation process. That satisfied my concerns, and I'm in favor of this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
I just want to speak at first to some public input we had, which I'm glad to see from a local business. And I think as we go through this process, I'd like to see more input from businesses if they want to give it. And I would assume that any local business that wanted to bid on this is welcome to do so. And if anybody wants to include in their input the barriers to that, that would be interesting to hear as well. But otherwise, I'm going to support the motion.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Yes, I just want to make sure that everyone did read one of the letter or an email that was sent in by the owner of McDonald's on this issue. And the key issue here is what I had brought up at the Committee of the Whole, and that is a fairness in no one's going to complain and no one's going to fight having these trucks all, wherever we want to put them, but they just want to to be on a level playing field, i.e. we can't be charging them $100 for the year or whatever, and then the guys that are in brick and mortar are paying the property taxes based on their square footage. So what the owner of McDonald's had suggested is that put us on a similar level playing field, and whatever square footage they're consuming in that area, they get the appropriate per capita charges. And I think that's a very fair way of doing it. So I just want to make sure that that issue is absolutely addressed when we complete this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Councillor Kobayashi actually made the points that I was going to make as well. I do really appreciate that we had the input, and while there are definitely differences between bricks and mortar businesses and mobile businesses, and this is an initial startup to see how it goes. I am supportive of us providing amenities in locations that support our residents, as well as our businesses that exist in Colwood. And I'm hoping that we can thread the needle on this one and have what the residents need and want available close to the places where they want to be, and the businesses that are located in bricks and mortar buildings in Colwood also feel supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I read that completely, Doug. I sympathize with him. I think that because this is essentially a trial thing and a startup thing, we don't know what rents are even going to be proposed to start with. And I think that it makes sense to try this out. I think even now with big disruption to the business, this may be a business that's more viable than some of the others. So I'm in favor of starting this trial process, and in 3 years, we may well decide to, instead of asking people what they want to pay, we'll tell them exactly what they have to pay to get this opportunity. So it's just a fact-finding thing for me, and I think we should pursue it.
Great, thank you. I will, just before I go to Councillor Baxter, the one comment I will make is I have a call every Thursday with all the mayors of Vancouver Island and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, Minister Robinson. And what was interesting was it was the mayor of Campbell River who they opened up 2 food trucks to sort of support vending from a social distancing standpoint, and was just basically talking about it on what a success it's been for their community. It's been an opportunity for locals to support local businesses, and then also sort of create an opportunity in a safe social distancing manner. So it was just a really nice feedback to hear some other communities having some real success with this. Councillor Baxter.
I support what Councillor Parkinson said. And I think that we need to, as well as balance the interests of the businesses, we need to balance that with the fact that we're talking about vending, I believe, only down at the lagoon. And I think that is something that our citizens really want. And unfortunately, the bricks and mortar businesses cannot replace that unless they too start a truck. So this is a process. We haven't come to the end yet, but I think that's the balance that we're trying to find. Thank you.
Councillor Kobayashi, then Day.
So I'm just going to rebut that a little bit, Councillor Baxter. You sat through the business meeting with the businesses last Thursday, and if the stats are right, if this is not exaggeration, in their own survey, they've said the bricks and mortar businesses, restaurants, are the ones that are in the biggest jeopardy, where at least 50% said they're not going to be reopening unless they get the startup capital to reopen. So you have to be aware of that too. And we can't be tone deaf, because they're the ones that are paying the business taxes to the city of Colwood. So I just want to make sure that I make this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay.
Thanks. Just very quickly on the question of whether or not bricks and mortar buildings are excluded. They aren't really. Many of you know that I've been a dragon boater for many years, and Nanaimo has their big dragon boat festival because they have a great harbor for that. And when you're there, there's lots of mobile food vendors that come, including McDonald's, who have a mobile McCafe. So it is possible. I don't know what's available to each franchise owner, but this is an opportunity that shouldn't negatively impact our bricks and mortar businesses because it's very location specific.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. Councillor Logan and Baxter, I cannot see you, so you'll need to give me a verbal if you are in opposition. So any opposed to this motion? Seeing none, that motion passes. Moving on to 7.3, which is the tax rate review 2020. There is a recommendation from the April 14th, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting. Mr. Thomas, our Chief Financial Officer, is available for any questions. May I have a mover, seconder, and then I will go to discussion.
Excuse me, Your Worship, I tried to get my hand up there.
Oh, yeah, please go right ahead, Alan.
I just want to disclose that the, notwithstanding the motion disclosure, that the recreational NPO tax class adjustment was deferred in the 5-year financial plan because of the impact on PILT revenue, which council was most likely not aware of at the Committee of the Whole meeting. So we are presenting the bylaw without the NPO rec change to the tax class, but we will return with a recommendation in our tax policy to be submitted in the third quarter of 2020.
Great, thank you. I am looking for a motion, and then I will go to discussion. I see Councillor.
My hand is up.
Yeah,
Virtually, and Right.
Are you,
Uh,
Councillor Baxter?
Like to move the recommendations with changes to match what the CAO just said.
Thank our CFO.
Sorry, CFO.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So I do have a motion on the table. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you,
Parkinson.
Councillor Parkinson. Discuss, Councillor Jensen.
I will lower my hand because I was trying to second.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, is there any discussion in regards to 7.3? I'm just giving people a moment. Cynthia, go ahead. Councillor Day, excuse me.
Okay, no problem. There was, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll correct that and just say there does need to be some work done on the light industrial because there were a few comments at last week's meeting that were not 100% correct. There has been discussions, they've been pretty pointed discussions about what the tax rates are comparing residential with business, and there has been some reasons for some of the changes that were made, and I just want to flag that as needing some fulsome discussion to understand exactly what it is that we're trying to incentivize and whether or not what we're doing will accomplish that. So I'll support this tonight because it is going to be coming back, but I just want to flag that I really want to dig into that tax split and make sure that we make a very informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Is this penalty, the 5% and the 5%, is that something that's legislated by the provincial government? It just seems kind of severe. I know it's 10% normally. I do understand that, but thinking of the times right now, is that just not a little severe? I mean, we don't even collect that in interest in banks, so that's my question.
Alan? Yeah. Excuse me, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, it'll be that'll be addressed later on, Your Worship. It's not in the 7.3 section.
Great. Okay, thank you. Mr. Earl?
You're on the wrong bylaw. Doug.
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. I was going to indicate the same at 8.3 section. There'll be the opportunity for council to receive the advice. At that time, you'll likely hear advice that the 10% is within the act, but how council splits it over time is malleable.
Great. Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to call the question. Is there anyone in opposition? Seeing none, that motion passes. Moving on to 7.4, which is the 2020-2024 draft financial plan. Recommendation from the April 14th Committee of the Whole meeting. Ms. Hempting is available if there's any questions. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Day, are you moving it? Oh, sorry, unmute. Sorry, Councillor Day, we didn't hear you. You were muted.
I'm being Michael.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Were you moving the motion?
No, I'm sorry. I have questions, and so if you like, I'll wait until after it's been moved.
Thank you. I'll come back to you. So I'm just looking for a mover and seconder right now. Councillor Baxter, are you looking to move it?
Yeah, I moved the motion so that Councillor Jensen can move an amendment.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second it so he can move his amendment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Logan seconds it. I'm going to go to Councillor Day first, She said she had a question, and then I will go to Councillor Jensen.
Excellent. So I was reading through the documents, and I do understand there's an amendment coming forward, which I am in agreement with, but the part that I'm finding difficult to understand is in reading through the bylaw itself, it would appear that a number of our reserves are being used to fund the 0% tax increase, but I don't see any plan in the 5-year financial plan to pay them back. And that was a big issue at Worcester Parks and Rec, where monies were borrowed and then they got forgotten to be paid back into the reserve funds. And I really want us to be careful, because my concern is specifically, we have a lot of federal and provincial programs that are in play this year, but next year is when all our chickens are coming home to roost, and we'll be looking at a 7% tax increase next year. And I don't see any plan yet for how we're going to replenish the reserves that we're using.
I will look to Ms. Hempting, if she's available.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Day. I did have a couple of slides prepared to accommodate the report for item 8.2. I'm happy to jump into those right now. What I will say specifically in response to that question, committee made a recommendation to achieve a 0% tax increase. In achieving that tax increase of 0%, we made a number of adjustments to the budget. None of those adjustments proposed the use of reserves. So what you see on the bylaw, the draft bylaw before you tonight, where there are a number of transfers from reserve funds, those are all proposed to fund either special projects or capital projects within the financial plan. Those are not transfers that help us achieve the 0% tax increase.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go to this, well, actually, sorry, I'm going to go to our CAO, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Worship. Just, I heard in there that a presumption of a 7% tax increase in a year. I don't believe that's accurate. I believe the number is closer to 3, but I'll ask Ms. Hempting to provide an accurate accounting.
Yes, on the page 4 of 5 of the financial plan bylaw report, under financial consideration, we give a summary there of the tax increase that the draft financial plan proposes. So you'll see a 0% increase for the 2020 budget, then moving to a 3.46% increase for 2021, 4.85% increase for 2022, 5.16% for 2023, and reverts to 3.79 for 2024. So in years subsequent to 2020, 1% of that increase is being set aside to the city's sustainable infrastructure reserve. And without getting into the detailed accounting for each year, the increase above approximately 2% relates to the introduction of new service delivery in each of those years.
Okay, before I go to Councillor Jensen to make his amendment, I will look to Ms. Hempting. Did you want to go ahead and show us those couple of slides that you said you wanted to show us?
Absolutely, thank you. So just a quick note, we had mentioned at the last committee of the whole meeting on April 14th that staff anticipated we may require a special meeting of council in order to get our tax rate bylaw adopted before May 15th. We are proposing that we do not need a special meeting of council. Tonight, we are looking at introducing the financial plan bylaw and receiving the first 3 readings. In addition, we will also be introducing an alternative tax collection bylaw that will speak to adjusting the penalty levy dates and amounts. We are looking to adopt that bylaw tonight, and that is in order to get that updated information on our pre-printed tax notices. Moving to the next council meeting, we will look to introduce and adopt the tax rate bylaw for May 11th. I did just review this quite quickly in response to a question, but the draft financial plan that is before you tonight for first 3 readings has reflected all of the recommended changes that came out of the April 14th Committee of the Whole meeting. And so with that, the majority of those changes are deferrals of new services. We also reduced our transfers to reserves in response to a number of revenue risks that were identified. And so we are looking tonight to receive 3 readings of the financial plan bylaw.
Great.
And happy to answer if there's any specific questions about the deferrals of new services as they were originally presented and as they are reflected before you in tonight's draft bylaw.
Thank you. I am going to go to Councillor Jensen. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I see we're still on the PowerPoint. Are we turning that off?
I'll leave it up for a moment. It may be helpful to aid in discussion.
Sounds great, Jen. Thanks. And I do want to propose an amendment to the staff recommendation. It should be familiar to all of you. I'll read it out specifically. My amendment, suggested amendment, is as follows: that we not defer the addition of 1 RCMP constable for the West Shore detachment as previously committed, and that funding for this officer in the 2020 budget year come from monies allotted to the RCMP Building Reserve Fund.
Great, thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Logan.
Sorry,
so-
can we get rid of the PowerPoint slide because I can't see you all when it's up?
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I have a move. We are on discussion of the amendment.
If I can motivate for a second, Your Worship. We're in some tough times, and I think we all acknowledge that by some of the decisions that we've taken of late. We cannot shortchange our community and public safety, and whether that's us, whether that's the police service, whether that's the fire service, it really makes no matter. But in this particular discussion, I am speaking about the 1 police constable that we did commit to for this year at the request of the RCMP detachment. We are blessed to live in a safe community. I would argue that we all enjoy that safety, and that safety requires an investment. We can't shortchange on that investment. We all know that we're in for an economic downturn within our province and our country. And it's unfortunate to say, but statistically valid, that as the economy worsens, crime stats become more relevant and in fact increase. So this is not the time for us to waver from the course that we committed to. I know things are tight for us financially and for all of us in our community. I am going to suggest that this is not a decision that I've taken lightly, because I do believe that our fiscal responsibility to our constituents is important and that we have taken some tough decisions. However, I am going to stand by my amendment, and I am going to look for support from my council partners. And I do think that this is an important step for our community in maintaining support for our detachment and our constabulary. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Ms. Hempting, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I believe, did I hear mention of using the RCMP Capital Building Reserve That would not be an eligible funding source for funding this increase in operating costs, but the RCMP operating reserve fund would be an eligible funding source.
I'm sorry, and I'm happy to amend my motion. She did use those words in her email this afternoon. I apologize.
All right, I think we're fine with that amendment. I will then go to Councillor Kobayashi. Oh, we've got to unmute you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support this this amendment because I think this is a proactive thing for us to do, and I do agree with Councillor Jensen, even though he's a cop. But I do support it, and I think it is a proactive thing that we have to do to keep our community safe. I guess where I was totally confused was that this certainly could have been done last week, but I just heard, we heard something different at the last meeting, that they were talked to and they were going to accept this, but I guess things have changed since then. So I don't know what happened, but so I'm sort of curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I think that this is a very good amendment to make. I was concerned both about fire services being delayed and also the RCMP hires. And as much as I like to make sure that any increases to our staffing complement at the RCMP are only done when they're necessary, I've been seeing an awful lot of comments on Facebook where people are posting pictures of people prowling in driveways and neighborhoods. And I've seen the RCMP release statistics saying that their B&Es and break and enter to vehicles are up like 150%. So I think this is very much warranted, and fundamentally the number one thing that we have to be is a safe community, and then we can be everything else after that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other hands. I guess the only comment that I have in regard to this is I will be supporting the motion. I definitely am comfortable with it. I do, I think we all saw this over the weekend though, but the crime index numbers did come out over the through Maclean's, and Colwood is still, out of 237 communities, we are still in the top 30 of being the safest communities in Canada. Something that I take a lot of pride in. I think it's a lot of pride a lot of residents can take pride in as well. I understand that this is a difficult time and there are break and enters and things are unsafe for some people. But I think overall we are a very, very, very safe community, and I certainly would not want to be messaging out there anything but that. I think I'm proud to live in Colwood. I feel safe when I walk the streets in Colwood, and I'm also support of making sure that we have the police in there that continues to allow our community to be safe. So with that, I see no other hands. So this is just on the amendment. I'm going to call the question. Is there any in opposition to the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment passes, which brings us back to the main motion. Is there any other discussion on the motion? I see Councillor Parkinson is leaning in, so I'm going to guess that, yeah, Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, I think a comment, I don't think, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think it needs a response, but the proposed property tax increases of 3.4 points, 3.46, 4.85, 5.16. I think those property increases could be very analogous to the 3.52% that we started with. That's proposed, and there's some rationale behind it. But as council rolls up its sleeves and gets into the budget at some time around this time next year, we'll be able to adjust those figures as we see fit. I don't know if we'll be looking at 0% again or what we'll be doing, but there's some numbers there that I think just incent us all to do a little bit of work on trying to make sure we do go through with the right multipliers at that time. I guess my only question on the 5-year financial plan really comes down to, I see we have some very large conditional government transfers and developer contributions expected this year. And our capital expenditures are pegged at $11 million for this year and $9 million for next year, and then dropping down to $2 and $3 million. Those don't seem very realistic to me. I mean, we're a third of the way through the year already. If we're going to spend $12 million on capital, I don't see it. I wonder if I get an explanation for those numbers.
I will look to Ms. Hempting. I'm assuming she's going to answer us.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Parkinson. In large part, the capital expenditure that you see for 2020 and 2021 includes a substantial capital works pertaining to Allendale, works and services, primarily road infrastructure improvements, also a traffic circle that's proposed for Veterans Memorial, and the VMP intersection. Both of these are works that will see funding coming from the developer, either by way of a contribution or a road DCC contribution. And certainly, years 1 and 2 of the financial plan are looked at in a much more granular detail than years 3 through year 5. So it is, absolutely fair to think that those figures for years, 2, 3, 4, and 5 will be subject to change as we get into 2021 budget deliberations.
So, Jen, I think the numbers that we've tossed around, and I don't think we've finalized the scope, but at least on the Allendale project, maybe on the roundabout, but they certainly don't come close to $20 million. Is there more in there?
I'm going to go to, I see, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Hempting. I also see my, Mr. Earl has his hand up as well. So I'm not sure who would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to comment on the first set of questions. For sake of expediency, administration has taken the practice of placing capital projects in one calendar year. And the reality is that a project will likely span 2 and potentially 3 years, depending on the nature of the project itself. And so administration will endeavor over the next few years to place the budgets for capital projects across the span of years that best represents the actual spend. You are not wrong, Councillor Parkinson. While these projects will begin in 2020, it is unlikely that the spend associated with the project and the completion of the project will end in 2020.
And I will look to Ms. Hempting. Do you have anything in addition to add?
Nothing further unless there are any specific questions.
Okay, Councillor Parkinson, did you want to do a follow-up?
No, I'm good.
Okay, I'm going to look, unfortunately, it's 9:58. I'm going to look for a motion to go past 10, please.
So moved.
Moved by Parkinson, second by Councillor Jensen. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Seeing no one opposed, thank you. We'll go back to, so we are back at 7.4 on the main motion. Is there any other discussion? I am seeing no one else's hands, so I'm going to call the question. Is there anyone in opposition? Seeing none, that motion passes. Thank you. We're going to move on then to bylaws. 8.1. This is bylaw number 1815, which is a council committee procedural bylaw. This is for adoption. I'm going to our Director of Corporate Services to speak to the
Thank you, Mayor Martin. This bylaw is presented tonight, as you've just noted, for consideration of adoption, and it received 3 readings on April the 14th. The key changes that are proposed to Council's procedure bylaw are to provide additional opportunities for Council to debate or amend bylaws and also to allow council to read bylaws of a routine nature as a group in those instances where council wishes to do that. I should note, there was some concern raised at the previous meeting, so I should note that administration will continue to present the bylaws, any bylaws of a sensitive or complex nature for individual readings. And that said, any member of council always has the ability to request that the bylaws be read individually. The proposed changes that I've just outlined were shared with the public through a notice of intent, which was placed in the Goldstream Gazette for 2 consecutive weeks. The notice invited members of the public to provide comments to council about the proposed changes, and no comments have been received. And I can answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you. I see hands up, so I will go to Councillor Baxter, then Day. Councillor Baxter?
I just wanted to move adoption.
Okay, thank you. So I'll look for a seconder and then
Second.
Thank you. Moved by seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Discussion, Councillor Day. Oh, Councillor Day, you're muted.
It's getting late. Just when I was reading the text of the bylaw through this time, it struck me that amendments to the official community plan bylaw are a simple majority. And it was my understanding that, and I'm not sure if this was in our procedural bylaw before, or because I didn't find it in the Local Government Act, but we did require a 2/3 majority for an amendment to the official community plan in the past.
Okay, so clause 29.5 of the proposed new bylaw, it describes the vote for an OCP, whether it's to adopt, amend, or repeal it, requires the affirmative vote of the majority of all council members. So what that means is if there are 5 members at the meeting when a vote is taken, it requires at least 4 of those people to vote for it. So not a simple majority. It has to be the majority of all members of council, whether they are present or not. Does that
Okay,
help?
thank you.
Seeing no other hands, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Oh, excuse me, I fell into the old trap. Any opposed? Seeing none, that motion passes. Moving on to 8.2, this is bylaw number 1818. This is the 5-year financial plan for 2020 to 2024. This is first, second, and third reading. I am going to do all 3 readings. I'm not going to do bylaw number 1815 on this one.
Move introduction.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by. Thank you, Councillor Jensen. So on first, any in opposition? Excuse me, Councillor Baxter opposes. Is that correct,
No.
Councillor?
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn. Okay, sorry. Okay, so one, excuse me, first passes. I'm going to second. I'm using the same mover and seconder. I am in discussion. There's discussion on second reading. Councillor Baxter.
I just wanted to, on this, I thought this was the appropriate place to do it, echo some of Stuart's comments about the future rates. I don't think it's possible for us to know at all what situation we will be in when we first start considering the budget about 8-9 months from now. And therefore, I don't think it makes any sense to try and guess what rate of tax increase we may want or not want then. So that's why I'm supporting the draft financial plan with those putative tax rates in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hempty.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment that the draft bylaw before you has not been updated for the amendment that was just recommended. So we would be looking for a reading as amended.
Okay, thank you. And I see that, I see Ms. Williams has her hand up, and I'm sure that's what she's going to also say. Ms. Williams?
Yes, Your Worship. If we can ensure that we include the text, that it be read a third time, or sorry, that it's amended in between second and third to revert the decision on the police.
Okay, so I can call the vote on second and then we'll look at amending it on third. Am I correct?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on second reading right now? Councillor Day.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on the amendment, because there was a staff amendment and a council amendment. The staff amendment was to not, sorry, I'm losing it now, but it was to do with the light industrial zone tax rate.
Right.
So
I will look to staff. Was that included in the, excuse me, Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. The light industrial change and the recreational change and the business rate change the split with which the taxes are divided amongst the various classes, but does not change the amount of taxes.
Okay.
Great. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to call the question on second. Is there anyone on opposition? Seeing none, second reading passes. Moving to third, I will look to Ms. Williams to help us again on how this should move. I'm sorry, for third reading.
Thank you, Your Worship. You could put forward a motion at this point to amend the draft financial plan bylaw with the text that the Deputy Financial Officer provided. And if that passes, you then give it a third reading as amended.
Okay, thank you. So can I just have a mover and seconder to that? Councillor Kobayashi. Thank you. Seconded by, I see a hand kind of waving. I think that was Councillor Parkinson. Sorry, Councillor Parkinson and Logan, I can only see a little bit of you. So that motion's been made.
Just a question for clarification. I'm not sure what text is being referred to.
Ms. Hampton.
Thank you. I'll take one moment and I'll share my screen and I can show you proposed verbiage for the amendment. So if we're looking to revert back to the policing budget as was originally presented, with an increase in strength from 17.6 to 18.6 in 2020, the following would achieve that and would ensure that the 2020 increase did not result in a tax increase.
Thank you. Councillor Days, does that answer your question?
Perfect. Perfect. I was just didn't want to be blindly doing the wrong thing.
Great. Ms. Williams, can you clarify for me? So I'm going to call the vote, and the vote is on the motion, or is the vote on the reading?
Right now, you have a motion to amend the financial plan. You've given it a second reading. You have a motion on the table to amend the financial plan.
And
if
then
that passes, you would then give it third reading as amended in a separate motion.
Okay, excellent. Is there any other questions on or discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I will call the question. Is there any in opposition? Seeing none, that passes. Ms. Williams, can you read it one more time for me? How does third go? As amended?
Third as
yes,
amended.
Yes, Your Worship. It would be third reading as amended.
Okay, and I'm going to look for two different, or I'm not two different, but because we amended it, I'll look for a mover and seconder.
I'll move it.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Day, second by Councillor Logan. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Any in opposition? Seeing none, that passes third. Moving on to 8.3, which is bylaw number 1820, the municipal tax municipal tax collection scheme for second, third reading and adoption. Ms. Hampton, did you want to present? It says you do.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. One moment. So staff have brought forward an alternative tax collection scheme for consideration tonight. We are looking for council to adopt this bylaw in order to provide us with the updated information for this year's tax levy and tax notice mail out. Just take a moment. Both our penalty and our due date is established by legislation. Now, that being said, council may adopt an alternative tax collection scheme whereby we can alter the dates and or the penalty amounts. There was a question earlier tonight about the amount of the penalty. We are required to levy a 10% penalty, but we are not required to levy that amount all in one levy. Historically, at least in my time with the city here, we have always levied the 10% penalty on the date following the property tax due date. The province made an announcement a few days ago outlining a number of property tax measures as part of the COVID-19 action plan. Included in those measures was that for commercial properties, the property tax penalty would not be levied until October 1st. There was no specific measures mentioned for residential properties. Since this announcement, CFO groups have been in conversations both throughout the province and within the CRD in particular about what proposed changes staff may be recommending by way of an alternative tax collection scheme. Just about every municipality is proposing a change to when the penalty is levied. We are proposing that the penalty for residential and other properties be levied the first business day in August at 5% and a following 5% levy first business day in October. And I'll just take a minute to comment on why we have recommended those dates. As you know, the city levies taxes on behalf of a number of other jurisdictions. We are required to remit those levies on August 1st. Now, one of the province's other measures that they have informed us of is that we will not be required to remit our school taxation until the end of the year. So that's a great measure in place to assist us with potential cash flow implications. But that being said, we will be required to remit levies that are levied on behalf of the CRD and the hospital district, for example, on August 1st. So knowing that, we are proposing that the residential tax levy be done on August 1st, and we're proposing a 5-and-5 split consistent with what a number of other municipalities in the CRD are recommending. Both of these measures that you see before you, the commercial property levy and the residential split levy, are proposed for 2020 only. That being said, there is one other consideration that's proposed under this alternative tax bylaw, and that is that in the event a taxpayer is eligible for the homeowner grant and they claim that homeowner grant after the penalty levy date, that the city would reverse the penalty on an eligible homeowner grant claim. And with that, I'll take pause and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you. The one comment I will say is I have spoken to some municipalities. What is before us tonight, View Royal is doing, is my understanding, it's the same with Esquimalt. The city of Victoria is doing 2% a month. So it's 22222 until they get to the 10. The outlier seems to be the town of Sydney. Sydney is doing a 0.5% on July 31st and then a 9.5 on October 1st. So that seems to be the outlier there. Councillor Kobayashi first and then Day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose an amendment to the recommendation. you know, we got to do anything that we can so that we don't penalize our citizens here. To me, this is how I look at it. I'm not affected by it, but you know, I actually agree with how Victoria wants to approach this, the 2-2-2-2-2-2-2 idea. So that's what I'm gonna be. I'd like to recommend as a change to the staff recommendation.
Okay, I will take that as the first. So do I have a seconder for that, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Day. Discussion on this. I will look to Councillor Day.
No, I don't need to discuss that. Fine.
Thank you. Sorry, I just saw your hand up. Is there any discussion on this? I don't see anybody's hands.
Can we lose our screen share?
Sure. There you go.
There we go.
Councillor Parkinson.
Just wondering, 2-2-2-2-2 over 5 months. So that would be 2% on August 1st, 2% on September 1st, 2% on October 1st, 2% on November 1st, and 2% on December 1st. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And okay,
Yeah.
and then I guess I would like to hear from Jen on how she thinks that would impact transfers to other agencies that she talked about, the CRD, the health, and others.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. You know, it's been interesting conversations. One of the reasons just about every single municipality is not looking at levying a penalty 5 times. I can say, you know, from our conversations, in part, it's just the administrative back end to levying that and communicating that out with each change in levy. Which is why we are proposing a levy that's split twice. You know, it's that tipping point of how do we ensure the incentive is there for folks who can pay by the due date to pay by the due date to best ensure cash flow and also, you know, recognize the unique situation that we are in. These were all things that we factored in when we drafted this bylaw and proposed a split levy of 5 and 5. So we've made that recommendation based on how we think that will best assist with cash flow and with incentivizing taxpayers to pay on the due date for those who can pay on the due date.
I don't see anyone else's hands. I will comment on this. Certainly support what Councillor Kobayashi is doing from a philosophical standpoint and trying to share out the pain. I think we have to also be realistic though, that there's a lot of people who pay their taxes through their mortgage, and so that what happens is that money is just sitting in a bank account with the banks. The banks will pay on the very last day they have to pay. And so we need to have some sort of penalty in place, because otherwise the banks will just hold on to those funds that have been collected throughout the year as people collected their mortgage payments. There's also some people who will want to pay immediately. You know, luckily we are not like Victoria. We do not have the cash flow issues that other municipalities have. So I'm not concerned about cash flow, but I am concerned about this being overburdening for our staff to be chasing people every month and trying to record who is paid, who hasn't paid, and who has to ask 2%. I understand from an efficiency standpoint, I think I would be supportive of more 2 penalties versus 5 penalties. So saying that, I won't support this motion specifically. Is there anyone else? Councillor Day, then Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you. I'm very aware of the cost of the staff time to do more penalties. So, you know, I'm kind of torn on the issue. It sounded like a good idea to give people more time, especially given what we've been hearing from our commercial taxpayers and the difficulties that they are experiencing trying to get their businesses back open again. So I don't know. I guess I'm finding it hard to support something that may be a more work for our staff project, because that does affect our bottom line too. So I guess I'll wait to hear from others. I'm confused.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm not into, yes, I'm usually Mr. Efficiency kind of guy, right? And I can tell you that right now. But I'm looking at this as a wholly different situation, folks. This is about being a bloody human. But we got to look after one another. And I don't know about you, but I do my daily walks here, and I hear people right now. So I just have a totally different viewpoint on this right now, and maybe my eyes have been opened up a little bit more here, but I mean, I wouldn't make this suggestion unless I heard it from enough people. So I'm going to stand fast on this, and I'm trying to be as humane as possible here, and to look after our residents. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I certainly don't take any offense to what you just said, Councillor Kobayashi, but I think we're all trying to do that. So, we're just trying to figure out which way is best to do it. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question then. I know there's at least one person who's going to oppose, so I'm going to go through. Councillor Baxter, for or opposed?
Opposed.
Councillor Day. Yeah, unmute, Councillor Day.
I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Favor.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Opposed.
Councillor Logan.
Opposed.
And Councillor Martin opposes. So that fails 4-3. Going back, we'll go back to the staff recommendation, which was a 5-5. Do I have a mover for that? No.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay, Councillor Baxter, thank you. And then Councillor Jensen seconds it. So I'm going to stop just for a moment, just because, again, I'm getting tired, so my apologies. So we are bylaw number 1820, which is a first, second, and third reading and adoption. Ms. Hempting has made a suggestion of August 1st and October 1st, I believe. And so we are in the bylaw reading right now. So this is a mover and seconder for the actual first reading. So on first reading, all those opposed? Anyone? Nobody. Councillor, yes, Councillor. So Councillor Kobayashi opposes. We will then go to the second reading. I'm going to keep the same mover and seconder, but we are in discussion, and we can modify this if there's another suggestion of something different. We can certainly re-amend it for third reading. So is there any discussion on second? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Councillor Kobayashi opposes. Then I will go to third reading using the same mover and seconder. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, anyone opposed? Councillor Kobayashi, I'm assuming. And then finally for adoption, I am actually going to look for a different mover and seconder, just because this is adoption now.
Move adoption.
Thank you. That's Councillor Logan. Seconder?
Second.
Thank you. I will go with Councillor Parkinson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in opposition? Councillor Kobayashi. So that passes. Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Thank you. Moved by Councilor Logan. Any in opposition? No. Thank you, everybody.